Oh boy, this is going to be a long story. It started at 6 years old, if you can believe it. We were in kindergarten and my grandmom and his were friends. He was pretty sick back then, so everybody indulged him in his behavior. Whatever. I was a willful child, so I didn't, because even then he made me feel uncomfortable in a way. There's even a picture of us somewhere where he's trying to hold my hand and I just pull away. I never did anything, hit him, or bully him. I just avoided him. Years passed, I finished elementary school and heard he'd undergone the surgery needed to make him better. I was happy to hear that it went okay, because who wants a child to die? He moved out of town, so we eventually just lost contact. Cue to the last year of high school. Somebody adds me on Yahoo Messenger, and not knowing who it was, I didn't accept the friend request and asked who it was first. But he wouldn't say until I threatened to block him. He said who it was, and honestly I was happy to hear from him. He seemed okay. We laughed, said we'd maybe go to a concert together that summer and all of that. I didn't make it to the concert. We both started college, in towns 500 miles or so apart, and spoke from time to time. At the end of that school year, I got myself a boyfriend. I didn't realize it then, but he stopped talking to me for the whole year. It should have been a signal, but I was oblivious. I didn't give it much thought, and he'd been offline for long periods of time before. Another year passes, and the next summer he writes to me that he's coming to town on a Friday and if we wanted to meet. Sure, why not? I take him to a park, we talk a little. He says that he's sad because he can't go to a music festival because he has no one to go with, and his mom won't let him go alone because he has frail health. I say that he can tag along with us, my boyfriend and our friends, if he wants to. He agrees happily. But here comes the freaky part. Some point I ask him how his grandmother is. He tells me with the biggest grin possible that she's been dead for a few years. That grin froze me. It was sort of sick. I left soon after, which I had been planning on doing anyways, since I had to go back to some classes. And that night I told my boyfriend. He said, "Listen, it's up to you, but I think you should avoid him altogether." He spoke my mind, and I did. Another year passes and I start a semester abroad in Sweden. I loved it quite a lot there, and went to a lot of concerts and stuff. One evening, this very weird Facebook account starts messaging me. "So, you're up there sucking Swedish dick for concert money?" I blocked it, and somewhere in the back of my head, a suspicion started building. I can't prove anything yet, so I just lay low until one day he messages me from his official Facebook account. "You whore, you like Swedish dick?" Now, at the time I had started dating someone in Sweden. I had broken up with my boyfriend back home some 6 months before, and I was tagged in a photo with him at a Therion concert. But that's not a reason to send this kind of message since, I didn't owe him anything and it's my business what I do. I block him, but during the next few months I get no less than 87 new fake accounts messaging me and my friends and calling us names and sending us death threats. When I return home, I get a hold of his mother's phone number and give her a call. All she does is complain how he's sick and he should just be indulged. I tell her that I'll be calling the police, to which she replies that if I do, I'm heartless, since they're gonna take him away. I end up emailing her a zip file of all the messages that he had sent to all of us, to which she replies that I'm a liar, her son would never do that, and she's gonna call the police on me since I'm trying to blackmail her. I politely announced to her that I had been recording the whole conversation and there's no blackmail anywhere. It's just me asking her to do something about it. She just hangs up and never answers again. The messages continue to come. I reported him to the police sometime in April, but nothing happens. In July, we're going to a music festival out of town. Since I had been there before, I tell my friends to stay right outside the train station while I go grab us some bus tickets from the ticket machine some 100 feet away. From right behind, he pops out like in a bad movie. "I'm Santa Claus," he says and starts laughing. I start back towards my friends, not letting him out of my sight. Luckily, they've seen him too, so they come towards me. He just runs away. For the 4 days we're there, I never felt safe. He's small and thin, but he might have had a knife or even a gun, so we stick together at all times. That was in 2011. He's been bothering us ever since. Some of my friends actually died in a fire 2 years ago, and he just sent us messages in which he mocks them, and he threats that he's going to burn all of us too. I've reported him 6 times over the years. Once he was taken to a mental ward for a month or so, but that's about it. He actually hacked my Facebook account once, but I managed to get it back, and now it's as secured as it can possibly be and everything's set on private. I ask my friends not to tag me in photos anymore. I keep as low of a profile as I can, and I avoid going to concerts alone. I'm much stronger than he is, but again, he might have a gun or something. I'm not really afraid, but you never know. I just hate it that my friends have to go through this too. This is a story I don't often tell. I promise sincerely that this has scarred me for life, and although I've looked into psychological explanations for what I heard and natural explanations for what occurred, they remain unsatisfactory to me. When I was a child, I was very scared of the dark. I swore to my mother I heard voices in it. They were not evil, but they were not familiar to me, so they scared me. It was not uncommon in the middle of the night for me to wake up and hear whispers, as I would call them when asking my mom. She figured they were just bumps in the night and typical kids' nightmare material. I tried often to explain to her that it was more than that they sounded different from one another the way people's voices do. On some nights I would get so scared from these whispers that I would sleep in my mom's bed with her. It was an added bonus that the bathroom was directly outside of the bedroom door for my late-night bathroom escapades. I should add at this point that when walking out into the hall to go to the bathroom, you look directly down the stairs that would lead you into my living room on the first floor, as my mom's bedroom was on the second. On one such night, around Christmas, I awoke and felt the need to relieve myself. I walked out from the door and distinctly heard the phrase, "Look!" And to my astonishment, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the very bottom of the stairs. The light had no other source, it was by itself, and I was transfixed by it. Being a little kid, and it only being a few days from Christmas, I knew what the light was. It had to be Santa. How else could he get into my house to know I was being a good boy? I was so excited I began walking down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace after the second step, as it began to creep off the wall and fade into the darkness in my living room. That's when I heard him. A very strong masculine voice, different from the first. Not at all like my father's. Not to say he isn't masculine, it was just distinctly different. It said, "Stop. Right now. Go back up those stairs." I listened, turned around, and what happened next I am not sure I would believe if someone had told me this same story. After reaching the top of the stairs, I heard a very loud crash that sent me running back to my mother's room, where I jumped straight into the bed and under the covers and stayed there the whole night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights, these little Christmas flower lights that glowed red, that my mother and I had put on the railing down the stairs, were pulled straight down to the bottom of the stairs, some broken from what seemed like a forceful tear, laying in a single pile. The dry sink in my living room had fallen from the wall. My mother couldn't explain it, and my father was worried that we had been the victims of a home invasion, and my sister was crying. There was nothing missing, nobody had broken it, and there didn't seem to be any reason that any of this had happened. And then I saw it, and I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I could not force words out of my mouth. There, on the edge of the wooden dry sink, which had been facing up, were 3 indentions where the finish on the wood had been worn, almost as if in a forceful grip. Something down there had grabbed it and threw it down. That was what the bang was earlier in the night. I was mortified, and after that day I never heard a single voice again. I don't like to imagine what was waiting downstairs for me that night, if anything at all, but I can tell you that the reality was that something had physically acted upon 2 things in my house near the bottom of the stairwell. After this, I had never heard another whisper again, which is sad because in some ways I would have liked to thank the man, or whatever it was, that had stopped me from going down those stairs. This happened when I was 7, and I'm 20 years old now. Because of this incident, I'm still afraid of the dark, especially shadowy stairwells. So, I've been stewing on this for a couple of weeks now. Recently, I randomly thought of an old friend that I hadn't seen since graduation. We went to different high schools, but had a lot of mutual friends and spent a fair amount of time together. I went to look him up on social media, but couldn't find a trace of him anywhere. It was really odd, but not that alarming. I found his dad and sister, but neither of their profiles mentioned anything about him, even on posts about or with other family members. I reached out to a mutual friend who went to his school, and even asked if she had heard anything about him over the years. She had no clue who I was talking about. Even after showing her a picture of the 3 of us at a concert, she didn't even recognize him. They graduated in the same class, so I went and found their senior yearbook online to look him up. He's not in it, anywhere. He was a varsity athlete. He had tons of friends. I have plenty of pictures of him. He was even at my graduation as a spectator, and no one remembers him but me. It seems like he doesn't exist to his own family. I don't get how a whole person just seems to have been wiped from existence, and it's really freaking me out. Just some quick background here. I'm a 28-year-old female and I'm a dog walker / pet sitter. Some of the dogs that I walk have reactivity, as did this one dog, a pit lab mix. She used to be a really bad puller, along with being incredibly reactive to other dogs on leash as soon as she'd see them. Though, through lots of hard work and training with her, she's come a long way with her reactivity to the point it really isn't an issue anymore, even when other owners' carelessness allows their dog to get too close for comfort. On this one walk, she was a dream the whole time. She passed multiple dogs without any issue. She would just look at me for her treat she knew she'd get if she was good. We turned down a side street that looked completely vacant at the time, so I could give her some more relaxed walking time, and all went well for a while. Not a soul in sight, until there was. While I'm usually very good at keeping my head on a swivel, as some of my walks are not in the safest parts of the city, this guy took me by surprise. I don't know how he did it, but he got about 2 or 3 feet behind us without my dog or me knowing he was even there, and all of a sudden shouted something unintelligibly. I could only make out the last 2 words though. "Your dog." Immediately, my dog, with no prior history of human reactivity, got between us and started growling, snapping, and lunging aggressively at this man. I'm a smaller woman at 5'3", and I'd guess this guy was about 6'7" at the very least, and incredibly muscular. As soon as he saw my dog trying to attack him, and me struggling to hold her back, he threw his arms up and bolted across the street without another word, disappearing shortly after around a corner. I've never praised a dog for reactivity until that moment. I gave her all the treats I had left in my pocket, and I took her home and told her owner what had just happened and how her dog might have just saved my life. Of course, I hope I'm wrong and that the guy was just slow with social cues, but neither the dog nor I got that impression. Needless to say, she's by far my favorite client dog. I go on walks with her still every week, but we haven't gone down that street again while there's no people about. I'm beyond blessed to have her and get to walk with her weekly, but I do hope I never meet the "your dog" guy ever again. I was only 7 and my friend, who we'll call Dan, had just turned 8 a few days before. It was the summer of 1988, and Dan and I were playing some basketball at the local park with the new basketball he had gotten from his parents. The court at our park was on the back corner and was backed up against the street and a fenced-in field, while being out of view due to the hills between it and the rest of the park. A maroon Buick Regal from the late 70s pulled up and 3 guys got out of the car. We didn't pay much attention to them because it was a public park and we were used to older guys coming in and taking over the basketball courts, considering we could barely throw the ball high enough to make a shot. One of the guys walked around to the back of the court and stood in the back entrance, and then one of the other 2 guys came into the court as the other guys stood in the front entrance. We continued to ignore them and played basketball on our own half of the court. The guy that came in took the ball and said we were going to come with him. At that point, we freaked out. We both started trying to run to the other side of the court. He caught Dan and took him over to one of his buddies, and then he threw the ball and hit me in the back, knocking me over. He picked me up and they put us into the back seat of his Regal. 2 of the guys sat back there with us. We were just screaming and yelling, but no one was around at 11 a.m. that day. They drove us about 10 miles north of the city limits to an old dirt road, then drove another 3 to 4 miles down that dirt road to an old 2-story house. It had one of those old basements with bulkhead doors. They literally threw us down there and then locked the doors on us. It was dark and it smelled like something had died down there. Dan had one of those squeeze lights that looked like a Bic lighter he had bought earlier that morning when we went to the convenience store and bought breakfast. We looked around the room a bit and there was a bunch of canning stuff down there. We tried to push the door open, but with no luck. The day went along and we were stuck. It never entered my mind at the time that we were in serious danger. In fact, the only thing I was worried about was getting in trouble if I didn't come home to check in. Evening came and we heard another vehicle drive up. Then we heard the Regal drive up as well. We could hear the guys and someone else yelling out in the yard. Then the door to the house slammed. We could hear the people walking around the wooden-floored house. The sun went down, and we began to really freak out. We knew that if we yelled, the guys who brought us here would come get us, and that would be way worse than just being left alone. The flashlight was about dead from an entire day's worth of use, but we found a phone jack that had been run down there, and we also found an old broken phone. We plugged it in and we actually got a dial tone, but we could not dial out. Dan remembered watching a MacGyver earlier, and they called 911 by using hanging up the phone in a sequence of 9 short times, then a pause, then another short click followed by a pause, and then another short beep. It took us an hour to get it to work, but the police actually answered. We were in full-on panic at that point, but we told them where we were and what had happened. They asked us who our parents were and how they could get a hold of them. We gave them their numbers. They said to try and hide and wait, so we did. After 5 minutes, we heard some faint sirens in the distance, and they sounded like they were getting closer. Then they stopped. About 10 minutes later, we heard a few cars pull up. Then a police officer on a loudspeaker. "Come out with your hands up. You are surrounded." About 20 minutes went by, then we heard someone banging on the cellar doors. We hid just in case it wasn't a cop. But then the doors flew open, and the brightest lights I had ever seen were shining in on us. 3 cops came in with guns pointed and identified us. They carried us out and put us into an unmarked police car. My mom was in the front seat, and Dan's mom was in the back seat. For about 8 months, well into the school year, we would have to go to court and testify about what happened on occasion. I believe to this day that the smell was the smell of someone else they had kidnapped and had killed. The 3 guys ended up getting 15-year sentences each, and the people that lived at that house got like 3 years in prison for not reporting the guys. The guys who had kidnapped us didn't really say much to us at the time. They were rough, but nothing sexual. It was not until I was an adult that I realized what had happened and the danger that I was in. I was actually happy that I didn't realize what had happened, because me and Dan went on to live the rest of our childhood as normal kids. We were just a bit more cautious of people after that. This story still embarrasses me to this day. I was in high school and I was one of the top students in my class, so I decided to train for a national competition. The teacher of the subject started giving me particular classes on recess. I barely have any friends that year, so I didn't mind. Nothing weird happened on those classes, but my classmates started making fun of me and saying I have a crush on the teacher. The teacher seemed pleased about that. He was twice my age, and I joked in class that if we saw the age difference as a fraction, it would be less and less every year. I went to the contest, got a nice place, and the next year I got a different teacher on that subject and made lots of friends in my new class. The teacher went with us on a week-long school trip. The last day he said he wanted to talk to me. A guy friend insisted to be with us. The teacher told me that I was one of the most important people in his life, that I helped him get out of a depression, and that I was in a special place of his heart. It was late at night and I was getting more and more sleepy, so my guy friend told me that we should go to our bedrooms, and he, my friend, escorted me to my room. Now I realize that he did all of that to protect me because he was suspicious of that teacher. Several years later, my sister went to the same high school and got him as a teacher. He insisted to train my sister for the same contest on recess. My sister has amazing talents and has won some competitions herself, but she wasn't particularly interested in that subject. However, he insisted on training her on recess and isolated her from all of her friends. My sister used to be very social and became a loner because of that. Again, nothing sexual happened between any of us, but it was wildly inappropriate. After that, the teacher got my mother's number. We suspect that he got it from our student file, and started to text her nonstop. He has some important problems going on in his life, struggling with suicidal thoughts, things like that, but my mother didn't tell me that at the time. He kept asking my mother for help, but never going through. My mother was exhausted, but she felt bad because he kept threatening to take his own life, so she kept responding at odd hours. One day, my mom told me he has sent me an email and wanted me to read it. I saw the email with a Word document attached. It was more than 10 pages long. I was furious. I realized that I hated him. I hated that he was isolating my sister, and I hated that he didn't keep his boundaries with his students, and I especially hated to see my mom tired of his nonsense. so I deleted the email without reading it. Finally, my mother invited him to the house to have lunch, and he behaved like the creepy weirdo that he was. He was touching things in my bedroom delicately, opening all the drawers. My father was fed up with everything, so politely, he told him that we were having a very busy year and suggested he got professional help with the depression and to leave us alone. My mom started responding less and less, and she cut him from our lives. The principal ended up calling my mother to her office and told her he didn't approve the, quote, recess classes and forbade him from doing that again. I know that he still holds a grudge against our family, but after my father killed him with politeness, he hasn't tried to contact us again. As a 4-year-old, I fucking hated tying my shoes. I was terrible at it and progress was just not happening. One morning I was throwing a shit fit because my mom told me to tie my shoes before we left the house. I was trying to avoid this horrible responsibility while crying and screaming on the 3rd or 4th step of our staircase. The ceiling above the staircase extended from the 2nd floor horizontally to the space above the 1st step, where it met a vertical wall that connected the 2nd floor ceiling to that of the 1st. Imagine a big upside-down L. So my punk ass is screaming on one of the lower steps, and my gaze drifts upwards after a few minutes. I stop crying immediately, and I go silent. I distinctly remember a man in a sharp black suit with the head of a boar, only blue and complete with tusks and fur, bracing himself in the corner of the ceiling, kind of like a ninja. He was above my head, just staring down at me. He didn't say anything to me, but I know what he wanted. My mom began to ask me what happened, noticing my abrupt change in mood, and I cut her off in a monotone voice saying only, "He told me to be good." For a few weeks before this, while out driving, I've observed pedestrians standing at the traffic lights who will reach into their pocket and look at their phone as they're walking across the road when the light goes green. Nothing significant or strange about this, just one of those mundane things you notice while going about your day. Today, I was driving with my daughter, and we stopped at a red light at a crossing, and there was this man standing there. Nothing out of the ordinary, denim jacket, black cap, glasses, and was around 6'2". I thought I'd try to weird out my young daughter. She was 5, and I knew this was going to blow her damn mind. So I said, "See that man? When the walking sign goes green, and he starts to walk across, he'll reach into his pocket and pull out his phone and start looking at it. Watch and see." As he walks across, he does reach into his pocket, but then immediately takes his hand out and looks and points right at me with his mouth open, smiling, looking like he was saying, "I gotcha." Of course, my daughter found this absolutely hilarious, and I just sat there completely mind blown. I must have sat there in silence looking at him walk across for the next 10 seconds. I drove on and had to look at him as I drove past, and he was smirking and laughing. I've been playing it through my head all day. The windows were up, the radio was on, I wasn't shouting. My voice wasn't even remotely raised. He must have been about 15 to 20 feet away from me, and I can't figure out how he could have heard me. It's literally impossible. How did he know I was trying to predict he'd reach into his pocket for his phone? The only even remote possibility I can think of is that he has had the same observation as me and thought I might be thinking the same thing, so just went for it. But realistically, what are even the chances of this? Recently, I moved out of my apartment. I simply had to because I didn't feel safe with my landlords. I lived in this really nice Dumbo apartment in Brooklyn for a few months with my roommate, who paid for most of the rent since her parents are super rich. Our landlords were actually this seemingly really sweet couple who lived a few floors above with their kids. The first few weeks were somewhat normal, except for the fact that every time I saw their kids in the elevator, they would scream at me before they got off and then just run away. I thought it was funny and cute at first, but then their eldest son came to visit and started doing the same thing, and he looked to be about my age. I didn't really think much of it, since maybe he was just playing with his younger siblings. Shit got really weird when I bumped into all of them together and we talked for a bit. Out of nowhere, while we were having a pleasant conversation, the dad apologized to me, saying that his son might act strange, because he's a I was pretty shocked with him just saying that out of the blue. I paused for a bit, and I can't really remember what I said, but I do remember just wanting to get the hell out of this conversation now. A few days later, I bump into the dad again in the elevator. I was pretty standoffish, and he was just talking about how great my apartment is and how much of a generous guy he is for giving it to us at such a low rate. Then he just asked if I could babysit his kids, as he and his wife and his eldest son would be at a dinner. I said no at first, but he counteroffered saying he'd pay $150 an hour, and being the greedy idiot that I am, I agreed. This is where I fucked up. When I get to his place, I was speechless. His apartment wrapped around the entire floor of the building. It was the nicest apartment that I'll ever see, that's for sure. About an hour in, everything was normal. I was playing some fighting game with the kids when we suddenly heard the front door slam. I told them to stay there as I peeked to see what was going on, and I see the dad just falling all over the place, clearly drunk as fuck. He started walking toward me and at the last minute fell face first onto the couch. I must have popped a blood vessel trying to hold in my laughter. I asked if he was okay though, and walked over to assist him. He then turned around, looked at me and said, "My wife will let us. Please." When I tried asking what he meant, his wife walked up to me, thanked me, paid me, and told me to come back another time. I just kinda went back to my apartment in shock, wondering what the fuck just happened, and I definitely wasn't going back. I told my roommate, and she told me that she also bumped into the dad, and he told her, quote, "My wife is cool, just so you know," with no explanation, and just left. At this point, we knew that we sure as hell were not going to renew our lease. We didn't see our landlords again until our final month. We kinda joked to our friends about how our landlords were creepy cucks. The next time I see them was actually with my boyfriend, who was well aware of what they were trying to do. It was an intensely awkward elevator ride, as when they saw us in there, they just went quiet and smiled and nodded at us repeatedly. As we step out of the elevator, the dad shouts "hey" to us and winks at me as the doors closed. After that, I asked my boyfriend to stay with us for the remainder of our lease, because at this point my roommate and I were freaked the fuck out. Our final and creepiest encounter was a few days before moving out. My roommate walked out of the apartment and both the landlords were sitting in front of the elevators waiting for us. She said that they started sobbing when they saw her and then begged us to stay. They apparently apologized for making us uncomfortable and said that they thought that we were the quote, pretty young girls they were waiting for. She didn't say a word to them and got on the elevator and called me to warn me that they were outside, and then they started to knock. My boyfriend answered and said when the guy saw him, he asked if I was here. Of course, my boyfriend said no, but they tried walking in anyway. I walk out of my room saying I'll call the police if they don't leave, and they then beg me to not and run out of the apartment. A few days ago, we got a text from a random number saying we could live there for 6 months free if we just gave them a few nights. Of course, blocked and deleted. The whole thing was such an uncomfortable experience living there all those months, especially knowing they had the keys to our apartment. When I was 17, I was involved in the distributing business. I was with some friends in a neighborhood north of Detroit. We were meeting up with some customers. One of my quote buddies claimed he knew these guys well. Later we realized he lied about that just so we'd go with him. We get to the shithole abandoned house. There's quite a few of those in Detroit, and that's an understatement. And we went into the basement. First thing I see is a giant of a man. Seriously, this guy had to be 350 pounds, 6.5 feet at least. He had a MAC-10 in his hand and shovels it right in my fucking face. There were about 5 other guys in the basement too. "Are you Kyle?" he asks. "No, this is Kyle," and I point to my friend. "I thought you two knew each other." It turns out we walked into the wrong house. I'm shitting you not, we walked into the wrong fucking house. Me and my 3 other friends were sitting in the basement of an abandoned house, run by a small-time gang. They had a bunch of hot plates and coffee pots out making crack right in front of us. At least 20 kilos were stacked on the table in the middle of the room. We were told to sit down and not talk. At that point, we knew we just had to get out of that place. I could tell the quote boss or whatever at that house was figuring out what to do with us. He went upstairs after making a phone call. At this point, all of our faces turn white and get scared shitless. Think getting called to the principal's office and having that little uneasy feeling in your stomach as you walk into his office. Multiply that by a fucking ton and you're getting close to what we felt. I was never more scared in my life. I tell the guy with the MAC-10 that we have 5 kilos of product in our car out front, which was total bullshit. He could have it in exchange for our freedom. You could tell he wasn't recruited to the gang for his smarts. So, without talking to his boss, he takes us to the car out front. I pretend to go in my trunk while my other friend distracts him by talking to him, and I grab a metal baseball bat. I hit him right on the head and he goes down. We jump in the car and gun it 100 miles per hour down that fucking road. He actually got back up and took a few shots at the car, but he missed and realized we were gone. Probably good I left that life behind me. I was 6, my brother was 5, and our mom decided one time she just wasn't going to give us back to our dad. So we packed some of our things into a couple small suitcases and a couple black garbage bags. It was very spontaneous. One minute we were just watching TV, and then we had less than an hour to decide which of our possessions would be going with us. We were gone for about 9 months, living in an awesome house with a spiral staircase in Central Oregon. Child Services found us when my mom registered us for school. So my brother and I were pulled out of class on the first day of school by police officers and taken to a conference room with those officers, the school counselor, and the principal. We were questioned why we never contacted the police. Well, because we were children who had little idea of what was really going on, we moved to a new house and our mom got us new skateboards. We were resistant to cooperate because they were very clear that we wouldn't see our mom anymore and they were taking us back to Seattle. We didn't want to live with our dad. He didn't know how to cook anything. So my brother snapped and started screaming and running around the room. One of the officers grabbed him, which transformed me into a very defensive big sister. I started kicking the officer holding my brother. My brother got a hold of the officer's baton and hit the guy with it. At this point, everyone had enough of our shit. My brother, who again was only 5, was handcuffed. And I was picked up by my ankles and carried outside, up until the point I was doing a great deal of kicking. We were then manually transported through the school right as classes were being released for lunch. I was wearing a blue cotton dress, and at 30 years old I vividly remember being hauled out through the school by my ankles and the embarrassment of knowing my underwear was showing. We were put into the back of a police car like criminals and driven to Child Services in Seattle. No, we didn't stop for food or bathroom breaks. My brother and I both pissed our clothes in the car. We were so hungry when we got dropped off at the office building, but all they had was some cocoa. We were never scared with our mom. Our needs were met and we were pretty happy. The way we were treated through this whole, quote, rescue was dehumanizing. The courts awarded my dad full custody and a restraining order between us and our mother until we were 18. My father was a neglectful parent, as well as physically abusive. I can't even count the number of times he was in court for child abuse. He actually used to brag about how all they would do is make him take an anger management course and how well he could bullshit his way through them. TLDR, I am not a fan of cocoa. I usually get over creepy encounters fairly quickly, but this one was quite different from the rest. I go by the rule, be nice to everyone because you never know who could be a secret serial killer, and that's worked out well for me the majority of the time. Although this time, it was probably what got me into this situation. When I was 18, I worked as a lifeguard by a small pool. Nothing fancy, I was basically just a babysitter to all ages. When adults got bored looking after their kids, they sometimes sought me out for some reason to have a free therapy session. Mothers and fathers talking about their hardships. I know I worked as a lifeguard, but I can't save that kind of life. One day, a 50-year-old man with his 2 kids came to the pool. As many other people did, he went up to me and started talking. It started with some small talk, like how he didn't let his children eat ketchup because it has the same properties to remove even rust from metals. But as the hours went by, he started talking badly about one of his kids. How she was overweight, had anger issues, and was, quote, worried about boys when no one would ever look at her. I'm not gonna lie, that last statement made me go quiet, and I tried to somewhat reason with him to not speak like that about his daughter. He seemed to listen to what I had to say, so I was happy that I could possibly help his kid in some way. Having a parent like that would have given anyone a hard time. The next day he came back, extremely happy, telling me that I was, quote, so good with kids, because my talk had apparently helped him. He then began the day by trash-talking his ex-wife to oblivion, like how she had the most custody over their kids, and that the kids only ate fast food at her house. I didn't say much because I felt like it wasn't my place to speak, and I didn't want to create any unnecessary drama at the workplace. But what set the first red flag in motion was when the conversation suddenly shifted into him wanting a, quote, young wife. It was as if he tried to trash talk his ex to get me to understand that he was single and that he was interested in a relationship with me. The days went by and he continued to visit the pool every day. To some extent, I had the feeling that he now came every day just to see me. I was fairly creeped out by this thought, so I tried to ignore it and just do my work. As the days passed, he started asking more and more personal questions like, "Where do you usually go grocery shopping?" And, "Is there a cafe close to where you live?" As I was fairly sure he was trying to figure out where I lived, I kindly deflected all of his questions with something very obscure. During my last work week, I had an afternoon shift. I asked my colleague who had the morning shift if anything had happened that day that I should be aware of. He told me that they had to ban a man from entering the pool area because he had reached behind the counter at the small pool shop where the workers keep their personal things. Apparently, he had been denied by my coworker to get a look at our work calendar, so he had tried to get a glance at it in a more illegal manner. That last week, I saw him twice at the end of my shifts, standing near the pool entrance. The second time I saw him there, I reported him to the pool security guards, and after that, I never saw him again. This is one of the biggest personal glitches I've ever had. I work at the admitting department of my local hospital, and I also help the business office with miscellaneous billing duties. One of the things that I do is keep track of obituaries. When someone's obituary appears in the newspaper, I check to see if they still owe the hospital any money. If they do, I clip the obit, fill out a form, and then keep track of how their insurance pays or whatnot. A few years ago, I've worked there for 20 plus years, one of my coworkers in the dietary department retired and passed away soon after. I know because I processed her obituary. This coworker's daughter was really good friends with my cousin, so the daughter was even over at my cousin's house the day after my coworker's funeral. They had a huge wake for her mother and everything. Today, as I'm working ER registration, the daughter comes in and says her mom is in the ER. I was brought up short. I thought, what? I didn't say anything for a moment, so my office mate had to step in for me and look up this lady's mother. Sure as shit, it's the woman who died years ago. My office mate lets the daughter back into the ER to see her mom, and I'm unable to find the obit form I filled out. Edit 1. I heard back from my cousin, and he's as weirded out as I am. The coworker's daughter has no memory of the wake or anything, but she said that she's been getting this stuff from the people around her for the past few days. People remember her mom dying, even funeral details and the like, but coworker's daughter doesn't remember any of it. Plus, her mom is right there. It's really freaky. Edit number 2. I spoke with my cousin instead of texting him. The coworker's daughter said it was her dad that died and not her mom, but she also said that it's not the way that any of the people who run into her remember it. They're asking where her dad is, how he is today, he's not answering his phone or texts, etc., and to her, the man has been dead for over 10 years. Edit number 3. I've been asked if I had any close calls or moments where I could have slipped from one universe to another, and yes, there was one instance. It was a little over 2 years ago. I was getting my evening medications together, but I was tired and screwed them up. I ended up taking an entire bottle of glipizide, which is a medication that lowers your blood sugar. I accidentally took enough to kill a horse. I realized it right before I laid down for a nap due to extreme exhaustion, and I felt really weird going to sleep. Looking back on it, I think I fell asleep forever there, and then woke up here. When I was about 17, I was winding down to go to bed for the night. I would guess it was around 1 a.m. I used to, and still do sometimes, stay up rather late doing my own thing, but this time I was talking with my mom, who had also stayed up. I remember that my dad had already gone to bed, though. I said goodnight to her in the living room, which was at the back of the house near a stairwell that led upstairs to my dad's, quote, man cave. This was when we still had one of those old TVs that when left on a certain channel would make a high-pitched buzzing sort of sound when nothing else was playing on it. I think it's called electromagnetic interference, or EMI for short. I heard this white noise and knew that my dad had left the TV on upstairs, so I went to go turn it off. I always hated going up there at night alone, because it was filled with antiques and family heirlooms from people who had since passed, including old pictures, paintings, and religious things. Plus, we had a couple of unexplained encounters occur up there, including bangs, things being moved on their own, and crosses falling off the walls. I had never specifically seen anything at that point, but I had heard stuff. Anyway, I got up there and indeed the old box TV was still on, so I just turned it off and quickly went back downstairs. I had realized that I forgot to mention to my mom about something that had happened to me at school that day, and quickly went to tell her before I went to bed. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember laughing about it. I said goodnight again and headed back down the hallway towards the living room. As I was passing by, though, I heard that high-pitched static noise yet again. I thought to myself, I already went up there and turned that off, didn't I? Because of my ADHD, I knew that I could be forgetful sometimes, but this wasn't the case. I very specifically remember going up the stairs and looking around a bunch because I was admittedly terrified. I end up just rolling my eyes, sucking up my fear, and going back up the stairs. The room has an open balcony that hangs over the edge of the stairs coming up, so anyone is able to see inside the room before reaching the top of the stairs. I slowly climb and peek over the edge of the balcony to see inside the dark room. The TV was indeed on again, because not only was the noise louder, but I could see that faint hue of the backlight illuminating a part of the room. Something then caught my eye to the right, and I turned to see my dad's computer chair slowly starting to swivel around. It was one of those spinny office chairs, and he had it placed right under the air conditioner so he could keep cool. I tried to keep rational, and I thought maybe that the air is just blowing it around a little. However, the chair then quickly jolted around to face me and completely stop. It was so sudden that it didn't even process in my mind. The room was definitely lit up enough to where I know I wasn't seeing things, and yet I had never seen anything so unexplainable like that happen to me before. Chills started to immediately run down my arms, back, and legs when the chair then tipped forward like someone was getting out of it. At that point, I just said nope, literally leaped down the stairs and ran straight to my room. I called my then girlfriend, who I could clearly tell I had just woken up from sleeping. I didn't really care though, and I proceeded to tell her the whole story as I watched my door waiting for something or someone to open it. Alas, nothing else ended up happening, but I was still close enough to hear that ringing from the old TV upstairs all night. I'm a guy, and I used to be a bartender. I was working a shift one night, and I started chatting to this girl. She seemed nice enough, so I asked her out, and a couple of days later we go on a very casual date. It was literally just to meet up for some coffee and a chat, that's it. My next shift starts at the bar, and she turns up, alone, and sits at the other end of the bar. I'm just doing my job, and I start having a laugh and a joke with one of the regulars. This crazy girl storms over and starts full-blown screaming at the other girl. She tells her to stop, quote, flirting with my boyfriend, and it nearly gets physical. The bouncers are actually already over, standing by to chuck her out. So, I tell Crazy that I'm not her boyfriend, that we've been on one single date that only lasted an hour. And if that's how she's going to react when I just talk to another woman, especially when I'm just serving a customer, she can fuck right off. She screams at me and storms away. The next day I woke up to about 50 text messages, starting with, "I'm sorry." Then, "Why aren't you answering?" Then a ton of abuse. Then she'd apologized for the whole thing and would start over again with, "I'm sorry." I just blocked her number. At my next work shift, she comes screaming into the bar, begging for forgiveness, that she's super sorry, that she wants me to unblock her number, please. I tell her in no uncertain terms to fuck right off and to leave me alone. Screams, tears, and another storm off. Then, a few nights later, I was going to bed. I turned off my bedroom light and my phone goes off. A text from a number I didn't recognize that just says, quote, "Good night." I look out of my window, and she's parked across the street just watching my house. That went on for a week or two, and then the strangest part happened. I was at work, and she walked in again. She came to the bar and told me that she was there with her new boyfriend. I breathed a sigh of relief while pitying the poor fucker. Then her new boyfriend walked in. He was my fucking doppelganger. I mean, people could have mistook us for twins. He even wore the same glasses as I did. So I was just standing there in shock, and she introduced this new guy to me as her, quote, ex. It's only funny looking back now, but the look on that guy's face when he realized he was me was just pure, oh fuck, she's insane. So she makes a big deal of basically wrapping herself around him all night in front of me, while he looked more and more uncomfortable. Then at some point he leaves, and she tries to get behind the bar crying hysterically that she was only dating him to make me jealous and she really loved me, not him. The ending is pretty anticlimactic. I went to the police station and reported her and asked how I could get a restraining order, but I never ended up needing one. Being removed from the front of my house on another late night camping session by the police scared her into leaving me alone completely. I know this story is going to sound weird and crazy, but please hear me out. I'm not too familiar with this subreddit, but a friend of mine who's always telling me about metaphysics, Twilight Zone, simulation type stuff loves this sub and keeps telling me to post this. In fact, no doubt he'll read this. Anyway, here's my story. 2 weeks ago, I was about to get ready for a party at 6. Just before I started getting ready, one of my friends messaged me. She was super excited because a boy she's had a crush on for the last 4 years finally asked her out, and he was coming with her to the party. While I was texting her back, my younger brother walked into my room and asked if I could drive him to his friend's house, which I agreed to do. Then I went to the bathroom to have a shower and do my makeup. So I got in the shower, but when I went to wash my hair, I realized that my conditioner was finished. I was pretty ticked off because I'd only bought it a couple days beforehand, and it's a pretty expensive brand. My younger sister always used up my things, so I know that she used it all. She had also trashed the bathroom, leaving water everywhere and her dirty towel on the floor. I was pretty pissed off, and was about to get out of the shower in order to tell her off and get some more conditioner. But as I went to get out, I realized at the last second that she had kicked the grippy mat we have at the bottom of the shower tub up. So as I went to get out, my foot slipped and I fell with my neck down on the edge of the tub. Time seemed to slow down in my head, and I remember my last thought was, wow, this is how I die? How stupid. But here's the thing. At the moment of impact, I woke up in a start, back in my bed. I know it sounds stupid and cheesy, like something from a dumb Netflix show, but there's literally no other way to describe what happened. I was lying in bed right before I got up to shower the first time, but I don't remember falling asleep. And the thing is, I've been a lucid dreamer for the last 5 years or so, and if this was a dream, it was way more vivid than anything I've ever experienced. What really weirded me out though was the exact same friend who texted me the first time messaged me after I woke up to tell me that the boy she had a crush on had asked another girl out, and she was pretty bummed about it and didn't want to come to the party. It was weird that there was some similarity between that and the dream, but didn't think much of it at first. As I went to reply though, my younger brother came in and asked if I would take him to his friend's house. All the blood drained from my face. He just stood in the doorway looking confused and asked me what was wrong. I rushed into the bathroom, feeling like I was losing my fucking mind. I went to check the conditioner bottle, and I know this sounds completely crazy, but the bottle was finished, just like before, and the grip mat was kicked up. At that point, I went to lie back down in bed and texted my friends to tell them that I wouldn't be going to the party. When I was 14, I was waiting for the bus at the end of my driveway, and this pickup truck pulled off the road onto the driveway itself. The driver kept waving me closer to the cab and held up a map book. At first he wouldn't roll down the window, but then he ended up doing so, and he said he needed direction to wherever. I really can't remember. I went closer to the window, and I didn't realize what was happening until he reached across and attempted to grab me by my hair. I dropped my book bag and ran for the house while he sped off. I woke my mom up and she flipped out, went to the window to look out, and surprise, surprise, the truck was sitting across the street and we could see the dude looking up at the house, which made me flip out. I assume he saw my mom looking because he left rubber getting out of there. My mom called the cops and a patrolman showed up and took information on the truck. Me and my mom went to the police station after that, and I talked to a detective and they did a composite sketch of the guy. The detective left to take a call and came back saying they had pulled someone over and wanted me to do an ID of the driver. They put me in the back of an unmarked car with tinted windows and drove me past a guy who was being questioned outside his truck not too far from my home. It was definitely him, and I had my first panic attack in my life. I thought for sure he could see me. They charged him with attempted kidnapping and something else that I don't remember. It made all the local newspapers, but my mom wouldn't let me read them because they wanted me to testify, and I guess they didn't want whatever was there to, I don't know, spoil my testimony? They pulled him over, by the way, in front of an elementary school where he was idling. I ended up testifying for the DA via videotaped interview. He was acquitted because he claimed he was deaf or something. I never quite understood how that worked. Found out later that he had been arrested for similar things and some sex crimes, but this was before the sex offender registry. I also found out why they didn't want me to read the papers. When they searched his truck, they found rope, duct tape, a bunch of sex toys, Vaseline, and an axe. It certainly could have been a coincidence, but my family filed a restraining order against him, and apparently he was ordered to stay away from schools. It wrecked me for a while. I had trouble going to school because I kept having panic attacks. I kept thinking I saw his truck everywhere, and I kept hiding from windows and the like. I had a lot of nightmares and got diagnosed with PTSD. For a long time, I had trouble getting past what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. These two girls started working at my company at the same time. They were friends and had applied together. After the first few weeks, I had realized that one of them had some sort of mental problem. She would say very odd, random things to everyone and freak out over nothing. She once exploded on me for not fixing a machine that kept having problems, claiming that I didn't do anything all day and just sat at the computer. So, a few months go by and she waves at me to go help her with something. When I get there, she starts telling me how I have this chance to be with her friend and what kind of flowers she likes. I was just speechless. I never even spoke to the other girl. She then went on to say that I should never cross my arms or put my hands in my pockets around her. I said, okay, and walked back to my desk, not understanding what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, things just kept escalating. She started leaving notes at my desk with the friend's phone number, trying to set me up on dates with her, and trying to get me to travel to Vegas with them, etc. I would just nod and try to make her go away as fast as possible whenever she talked to me. Other coworkers didn't believe what I was telling them about this girl. They started to tease me and would have a great time listening to my stories. Then one day, they too experienced one of her meltdowns when we were all at our desks at the same time. She started yelling at me that the friend and I needed to resolve our differences because she was taking it out on her car, whatever that meant. She caught me in a bad mood and I snapped right back at her. I told her that if she had a problem, she could take it up with management, so she did. She went to the managers and told them the entire fantasy that she'd been bothering me with. It didn't take long for them to realize that this girl was nuts. Keep in mind, I never spoke a word to the other girl. I suspect what happened is that the friend may have said that she thought I was attractive once, and the other one fabricated an entire story in her head. They both left a short time after that last incident, but it wasn't the end of the craziness. Months later, I found out from someone else that she'd been lying to other people about me. She had claimed that I got the friend pregnant with triplets and that she had a miscarry. I'm sure that there are other things that she said about me too that I still haven't heard about. My house was built in 1904. It's a single-family home, wood-frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I've been living there for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and I have seen or heard in the house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friend had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evenings and eventually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed because I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter, and they had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddies so they could go load up the equipment, and everyone had filed out of the basement. The tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall into the living room, and out into the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He then made the decision to go back and get them. Now the basement is not clean, with full sight lines. There had been partitions made, and the boiler and the main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he's about to retrieve his food container when out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. It's a shadowy figure, right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you were in the presence of a spirit or a ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother, of course, chose the latter. He basically just told it, "Hey, fuck you, I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as the rest of the house did too. As he stepped out of the house, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps, and he walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friends in his truck, he smiled and thought things were over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there really wasn't a reason to. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of his house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" I lived in a small suburbanish area of a small town. My house was very close to my grandparents' house. It went my house was on one block, a large church with a large parking lot was the entirety of the next block, and then the block of my grandparents' house. My grandparents were both retired, and so every day during the summer while our parents were at work, a few of my cousins and I would spend the day at my grandparents'. Honestly, it was such a fun childhood to have. When I was around 11, my parents bought us a dog. One of my chores during the summer was to walk over to my house and let the dog out to use the bathroom, and then walk back to my grandparents'. One of my cousins who was a year older than me would always go with me too. Well, one day we were on our way back to my grandparents, and a guy drove up next to us. In one quick motion, he opened his car door and yelled, "Gotcha!" At that moment, my cousin and I just took off running. He quickly shut his door and sped ahead of us into the parking lot of the church. Instead of running through the parking lot, my cousin and I ran behind the church, but continued in the direction of my grandparents. When we emerged from the backside of the church, the guy was still in the parking lot, his head on a swivel looking for us. We continued to run. A few heartbeats later, he spotted us, and we heard his tires squeal again after us. Thankfully, we were very close to my grandparents and quickly made it inside. We ran in and told my grandmother, who of course didn't believe us, and told us to go back outside and play. So, we did as we were told, and my cousin and I did go back outside. Still spooked, neither of us felt like playing and just sat on the front porch. Soon, the guy drove back and slowed down as he passed. We ran back in and told my grandmother, who again didn't believe us and told us to go back outside. Well, the third time of us coming in and interrupting her soap opera, she finally came out on the porch, and at the same time the guy passed by again. She called the police, and while we were talking with the police officer, the guy drove by again and we pointed him out. But the police officer just took our statements and left. We never saw that guy again. I would like to think that the police officer pulled him over and scared him into not bothering us or anyone else again, but I highly doubt it. When I was 19, I worked at Walmart in a festival town. I was a cart pusher, and in the summer the store would get overrun with festival goers. On this week, many years ago, there was a hippie music festival going on. The venue was very large, and the population of this small Midwestern town would swell by several thousand people. I remember that I was walking away from the store to gather shopping carts, donned in my blue vest of honor, and there were 2 or 3 young women about my age walking towards the store to enter. They were obviously festival goers and all donned out in their hippie-esque regalia. I saw this blonde girl from about 20 feet away, and something about her just struck me with a massively intensive feeling of familiarity. We began to walk slowly past one another and locked eyes and could not stop looking at one another. Then she stopped, pulled away from her friends, walked up to me and said, "I know you. Where do I know you?" I told her I was experiencing the exact same feeling. We stood there for 20 minutes while our friends became very impatient. We tried to recall past towns we both lived in or people that we might have known mutually. But nothing in our histories lined up. Like, not whatsoever in the least. She was from a different state entirely. There was no crossover whatsoever. Eventually, we gave up and went our separate ways. I was a far less confident and socially awkward man then, and I should have gotten her Facebook or number or whatever, but I didn't. I'm 34 now, and I still think about her all the time and wonder very deeply about who the hell she was or how we could have felt so strongly about one another with no apparent connection. I lived in an old 2-bedroom, 3-story walk-up for a time in my early 20s in Toronto. A few days after moving in, my roommate Mike chides me in the morning for banging on the wall that separated our bedrooms and pacing back and forth across the apartment all night. We just agreed that he must have been dreaming, or it was sounds from other apartments, as I had done no such thing. We agreed that it must have been nothing and left it at that, but this soon became a regular nightly occurrence. Shortly thereafter, I started noticing at certain times in my own bedroom the cloying smell of cheap women's perfume mixed with a damp, musty smell. Imagine an old person's clothes left on a damp, musty basement floor near a litter box that wasn't being changed often enough, and you get the idea. What made it even weirder is that I would be filled with a sudden horrible sense of foreboding a few moments before the smell would begin. Mike flaked out and left only 4 months into our 1-year lease, which meant I was left footing the rent for the entire place until I could find another roommate. I had decided to try and sleep in his bedroom shortly after he moved to see if things would get better. The very first night I slept in his former room, I had an incredibly detailed and realistic nightmare of myself standing in the dimly lit bathroom of our apartment and cutting my own face with a large shard of glass while staring into the broken bathroom mirror. It was only broken in the dream. Soon after that, I started to hear the loud bangs at night and the flushing of the toilet in the bathroom. Several times the hot water in the bathtub turned on full blast in the middle of the night. One of the freakier things that happened not too long before I moved is the time I was woken up by the TV blaring Poltergeist on City TV at about 2 in the morning. At the time, the channel would always play movies late at night, but the fact that one time my analog TV, which I turned with a knob, turned on by itself at full blast was the time a movie like Poltergeist was playing. I had a coworker who was a bit of a loner. I was 16 and I felt bad for him because he seemed like a genuinely nice person. When he asked me to hang out, I agreed, but I clarified early on that I wanted to hang out as just friends. He assured me that there would be other people there too. So we meet somewhere to hang out and no one else shows up. It's just him and I. I thought this was odd, but didn't think too much of it. He started going off about how much he liked me and how perfect I was, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I came up with an excuse to leave and wrote the whole thing off as a bad date. The next day forward, I start receiving text messages. I later came to find out that he stole my phone number from the work computer. He kept sending me messages about wanting to see me, and it progressed to him consistently calling and texting. I did my best to act polite at work, but ignored all of his attempts to communicate. A few days pass, and I get a call from my little brother that someone's at the door for me with flowers and cake. I asked him to describe what the person looked like, and sure enough, it was him. He stole my address from the work computer as well. I told my brother to quickly get back into the house. That night, I go home and I swear I see camera flashes outside my window. I started to get really freaked out and told my mom about this person consistently calling and texting me and showing up at our house now. My mom told me to tell my manager at work, and we decided we would file some type of complaint. A week passes and I hear nothing from him, and I thought that perhaps he had enough. But alas, I get a call from him after a week from a different number, and he starts telling me how he wants to marry me, and I'm the only reason he's alive. I told him to stop bothering me, and I want nothing to do with him anymore. He calls again, though, the next day from a different number while I'm at work and tells me he wants to come see me at my house. I tell him that I don't want him anywhere near me and to leave me alone. I go home and go to bed as usual. Well, around 3 a.m., my mom comes into my room and tells me to come downstairs. A cop is waiting in our doorway, and he begins to question me as soon as I make it down the stairs. How do you know him? Do you know where he is? Apparently he left home, and his family got worried. They told the cop that I'm his girlfriend. I told the cop the situation. The next day I go to work and he doesn't show up. Everyone knew that he was missing because his family had called the place we worked. Everyone asked me, "Do you know where he is?" And everyone knew that he liked me and assumed that I knew. Well, around noon, a coworker comes up to me and says that she needs to talk to me, and we go to the break room. She tells me that they found him. Good, I thought. I'm glad that he's okay. She tells me to sit down and whispers in my ear. He shot himself. I just collapsed off the chair and felt a pain in my chest that I never felt before. What did I do? I thought. For the next few months, everyone treated me like a ghost. Everyone at work blamed me for his death. His brother called me and told me how sorry he was for my loss, and that he has a bunch of my stuff at his house. Mind you, I never stepped into that home, or gave anything of mine to him. His brother knew everything about me, and I had no idea who this person even was. I felt so much guilt that I couldn't tell him what was really going on. A year or so after this happened, I came to find out that he drove to my house and shot himself a few streets over from my neighborhood. I'm a male and was about 20 years old when I was hijacked. It was the middle of winter with lots of ice and snow, and there was very low visibility. I was driving my 92 Geo slowly down my home street, and it was about 3 a.m. My driver's side window was down to help keep the windshield from fogging up. A person steps out onto the ice into the middle of the road and stands there with his arms out like he's flagging me down for help. I stopped instead of trying to swerve around him on the ice, plus I figured it must be an emergency. It's a narrow street, and his friend comes out from between the parked cars on the side of the road. I didn't see guy number 2 until the razor blade was against my throat. He tells me to unlock the doors, then stands there while guy number 1 gets in the seat behind me. Then guy number 2 gets in the passenger seat and rests his arm on my seat near my shoulder, the hand with the razor hanging by my head. Guy number 1 tells me everything is cool, just drive them where they wanted to go. I take his directions, he and I make idle chit-chat while I drive, mostly on the highway to a part of town I didn't know. Guy number 2 keeps threatening different ways he could cut me, while guy number 1 keeps telling him to chill out. It's about a 45-minute drive, maybe more. They were both trashed, but I started to get an idea of what was happening. They both had met earlier that night at a bar, then went with a group to an after-party in my neighborhood. They got kicked out of the party and started looking for a ride to go across town to, quote, sell shower curtains. I didn't bother to ask what they were actually selling. So we get to this shitty neighborhood and pull down an alley, then up behind these rundown condos. I don't know why I wasn't terrified before, but I was then. Drug deals can go bad, you know? And I drove these guys there. Guy number 2 goes in, while guy number 1 is sitting behind me still chatting with me. Guy number 2 comes back, no problem. He splits some money with number 1 and then we drive off. Guy number 1 gives me some seemingly random directions, then points at a parking lot that he wants to be dropped off in. I stop, he gets out, and guy 2 thankfully gets out as well. Number 1 turns around and starts yelling at number 2. You're not going with me, motherfucker. I don't know you. I don't know you. Get back in the fucking car. I lock my doors and roll up the stupid fucking window. I didn't hear anything distinct after that, and I still don't know why I stayed behind to watch them argue. I left real quick when number 1 pulled a little revolver out of his pants and stuck the gun in number 2's face. I then went home and went to bed. I was chatting to a friend and I remember this creepy story from the pandemic. I, a female in my 30s, lived alone. I had no car and no shops nearby. It was around 9 p.m. and I got back from work and realized there was no food in the house, so I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to the COVID rules. Later, there was a knock at my door and I saw a tall, skinny guy standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it on the floor and back up. He said no and that he had to hand it to me because it had alcohol in it. I hadn't ordered any alcohol, so I told him that he had the wrong order. He claimed that it was correct. I told him sternly to put it on the floor and back up. Again, he refused. Stupidly, as I was tired, I opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to the COVID rules, and he stepped toward the door and put his hand on the handle. I pulled it shut and shouted to tell him to leave or I was going to report him. He put it down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did, but again when I opened the door he stepped forward. I now always remember the chill down my spine when he said, "Pretty, very pretty," in a low monotone. I noticed that he had his phone out pointed at me and asked what he was doing. He said he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face and not at the bag on the floor. I grabbed it and slammed the door shut and locked it. I watched through a crack in the curtains as he stood by the door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind. He knocked again, but I ignored it. I was getting seriously creepy vibes and called my best mate for advice. She told me to report him and not open the door. I shouted out the letterbox for him to leave, but he just stood there. My dog, who is normally the sweetest thing going, had picked up on my anxiety and began barking at the door. He turned and got into his car that was parked across the street from my house. I kept watching for the next 10 or so minutes through my window, but he wouldn't leave. He just sat there. But I figured maybe he was picking another order to take. Suddenly, a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in the car and asked me to come get it. I checked my order and it was all there, so I messaged back saying it wasn't mine. He got insistent, saying he couldn't leave until I picked it up. He was practically begging me to come to the car, saying it wouldn't take a minute and that I could grab it from the passenger side. I lost my shit. I told him that I had heard what he had said, that I knew he was taking a pic of me and not the order, and that I was calling the police. He still said that I had to come get it. The entire time I was on the phone to the police, he was still messaging me, even saying, quote, "The police not come, pick up order and I leave. Why you making it hard?" The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with the doors locked. My dog was going nuts, with hackles up and barking. My neighbor's husband, who was 6'4" and built like a brick shed, texted saying he heard a commotion and asked if I was okay. I told him what was going on, and he immediately ran out, shouting at the guy that the driver was a predator and to, quote, "fuck off" before he got fucked up. The delivery guy then peeled out of there, and my neighbors came over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. The police never came back to me. I got a car shortly after and didn't use Uber again until my boyfriend moved in. So, to the creepy predatory Uber driver, let's not meet again. My grandmother suffered from heart problems and worsening dementia after my father passed away, as they were very close. After a few years staying in a nursing home, she could just remember who we were, and that was about it. If you came in and ate breakfast with her, she would have forgotten the entire event by lunch. Anyways, one night we get a call that my uncle who lived in the next state over had committed suicide. We waited a few days until a quote good day when she was more mentally stable to visit Granny and break the news. We get there and start some small talk, but before we get to the subject at hand, she says, deadpan, "Well, I guess Jeff is the only one left." We ask her about it, and she tells us that Terry, the son we came to talk to her about, had shot himself. Mind you, he lived in a different state, and none of the family back home had any of the details yet, having no idea how he had done the deed, just that he had died. We asked a little bit more, and she basically told us that Uncle Terry had called her a few nights ago and told her he had just shot himself in the head. We later learned that he did in fact shoot himself in the head. So, either my uncle's ghost has better phone service than I do, scary, or he was still conscious immediately afterwards and was able to make a call, horrifying. Or he called her just before himself to say goodbye, which is absolutely depressing. And my grandmother interpreted it wrong, but managed to remember it all the same. I think I might have shared this already, but I need to go into more detail about what happened. About 6 to 8 years ago, my friend Giovanni and I left my house to go get some late-night McDonald's. You know, just as young fellas do at 2 a.m. after a night of partying. We got into his white Mustang, left the neighborhood, and began driving on one of the main roads towards McDonald's, which was about 2 miles away. As we cross an intersection just about half a mile away from McDonald's, we get slammed by another car and thrown, and we proceed to roll. All I remember from the impact is that the car was speeding very fast. The impact was brutal and glass shards flew everywhere. There was the sound of plastic and metal scraping the asphalt. We died upon impact. We were gone. Then it all just went to black. I saw that the car was annihilated looking at it from above. The scene was really distressing. Then, just as soon as the scene played out of our deaths, it abruptly ended and we automatically went back and we were both standing at the front door about to leave to McDonald's. I look over at Gio, and Gio is tearing up and shaking with his hand on the doorknob. I say, "Bro, what the fuck was that? If we leave and go right now, we're gonna die in a car crash." All he replied with was something along the lines of, "I know." Gio was shaking terribly, and I felt sick to my stomach. We had just both lived out our deaths. Neither of us had been doing any drugs or drinking. We both stepped away from the door and walked back into the family home and sat on the couch and didn't say a word to each other. We both just stared off into the distance. I had just lived my own death, and so did he. We both knew it, and we both had no idea how to explain it. When I was a teenager, I saw myself 2 times at my childhood home, and I can't explain it, but will never ever forget it. The first time, I was walking down the stairs in my home. The stair was U-shaped, and when I got down to the middle part of it, I saw the back of myself walk firmly down the last steps and turn straight to the right and into the entrance hall. I remember being really surprised, but also a bit creeped out about the way that I walked. It was really robot-like and stiff. I had no interest in following, quote, me, so I ran to my room. I got really scared and didn't share this with anyone. The next time actually happened soon after the first time, when I was out playing in our yard with my siblings and our cousin. We had a big yard with a lot of trees and bushes. We were running around when I saw myself again, just standing frozen between some bushes. I remember it really vividly, and I can even recall the blue sweater that, quote, I was wearing, which was my favorite back then. I wasn't sure if I should even ask the others if they could see it too, and I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me, or get afraid themselves, so I just didn't say anything. There was really something off about the way that, quote, I was standing, or something, but it gave off really unfriendly vibes. I've never experienced anything like this before, and sometimes I wonder if it really happened, because there's no way for me to explain it. I'd seen weird stuff before, like my deceased grandfather standing in a doorway appearing alive, well, happy, and dressed in a fuzzy, snazzy white suit, but I would just blink and whatever ghost I saw would be gone. I would just chalk it up to a momentary brain fart and move along. One night in 2005, though, when I was 18, I was chatting with some friends on AOL Instant Messenger. Remember those days? I told them I'd BRB and went out the back door to get my CD collection out of my car. Remember those days? It was around midnight with clear skies and a full moon and good illumination. I wasn't the least bit scared or nervous because I had literally done this 1,000 times before. My mind wasn't on anything the least bit supernatural. After I grabbed my CD case, I turned around to head back in when I saw her standing there near the garage at the front corner of my house. She was about 35, an attractive brunette with light blue eyes wearing an 80s-era peach-colored nightgown. Her body was facing away from the house, and she had to crane her neck at an uncomfortable angle to watch me. She kept playing with her run-of-the-mill crucifix necklace. She was giving me this maternal, admonishing look, like when a child disappoints its mother. If it wasn't for this slight, otherworldly glow to her, I would have thought that she was a crazy neighbor. My next thought, I'm seeing shit. I just blink and she won't be there anymore. So I do. Wrong. She was still there, eyes fixed on me, playing with that necklace. I walked to the edge of our property line, about 12 feet away from her, and slowly made my way to the back door. She never changed the orientation of her body. She just rotated her head like a sentry gun to keep me in her sights. She followed me with her eyes until I ducked behind the back corner of my house. When I got to the back door, I locked it up, shut the curtains, and proceeded to tell my AIM buddies all about what I had just seen, adrenaline pumping through my veins to the point it was difficult to type. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I've never had a 30-second hallucination before or since either. I can't explain her away. I was kidnapped when I was 10. If you've seen Mystic River, it was a lot like that. 3 men in suits convinced me they were police officers and they had badges, or at least they looked enough like badges to me at that age. They told me my mother was hurt and they were going to take me to the hospital. They were super detailed. They knew my mother's full name and the names of everyone in my family. They approached me asking if I could confirm it was me. They then provided information about my family to make me feel secure. They drove me to what ended up being just outside the city, opened the door, and that's the last I remember from right there. I woke up in a padlocked dog cage, naked. The first 24 hours, they just kept hosing me down, so I was consistently wet and crying. They would never smile or laugh that day, and barely even spoke, just the hose and staring. The next day was when the and abuse started. They would force me from the cage after I made it clear I wasn't cooperating and did things I consistently try to forget. I really don't feel that anyone would be better off reading it. The third and final day was when the talk of the chase started. This is when the laughing that haunts my mind started too. I hear that fucking laughter every day in my head. They spray painted me red as best as they could while I was in the cage. They told me if I was nice and good then, they wouldn't have to hurt me as bad before they started chasing me. I finally accepted their terms and told them I was sorry for being bad and that I loved them. It was what they had been asking me to say this entire time. The smallest of them gave me a hug, and the next thing I remember was being woken up in the back of a different car than the one they had taken me in. The small one told me it was time for the end, and he wasn't going to hurt me before I ran. He opened the door and I just sprinted. I was in a very hilly area, but it butted up against really thick trees. They all started laughing and I heard a gunshot. I bolted for the trees and made it in before I heard them. I stayed super close to the tree line, and as soon as I thought they were all three in the trees, I snuck out back towards where we came from. I never heard them after that. I made it to a road and found some houses. The first 3 doors I knocked on didn't answer, and I know for a fact one of them was home. I saw them looking at me through the window. Finally, at the 4th house, a woman opened her door and I ran inside her house and just started crying. The rest is very basic, getting back with my family, the police investigating, all of that. No one was ever arrested or punished though. Once, about 5 years ago, I thought a guy looked like one of the 3, but the report on the news was about him being killed by a police officer after a traffic stop where he pulled a gun on the cop. So I never really got to find out any more. And that's my story. I was scared. I tried so hard to believe I was going home, but by the end of the 2nd day, I knew I was gonna die. I even started trying to think of ways I could take one of them with me. I wanted them to die with me. I wanted someone to be punished. It all haunts me pretty bad still, but I honestly feel I'm incredibly well adjusted for all of it. No one other than my fiancé and a very few close friends know about any of it. I have a few things that really get me still, like I can't be wet for extended periods of time, and when I am wet, I prefer the water to be incredibly hot. The words, quote, "I hate you," even if in a joking fashion, really set me off. I break down hard because regardless of who says those words, I hear those men. I've had a few mental snaps in the last couple of years where I shut down and can't speak for a few days. And I hear the laughing. I wish I didn't. This happened a few years ago around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick one anyway. As we walked back home, we went down this one street that we used all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street, then back into our neighborhood again. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music of my phone. I turn it off and turn to look for the dog because I love dogs and I wasn't aware there was a big dog on the street. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I had stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought that we were being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me that there was 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh?" I swear his voice sounded like the definition of the sirens' voices, luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking questions to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on the other side. We looked back across the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys had disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog. She asked me, what dog? I asked her how she didn't hear this massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what it was that I heard, but I do know it most likely saved my life. A few years ago, when my daughter was 3, I decided to go back to school and become a nurse. My husband and I were in no way trying for a baby whatsoever. I was on birth control and we were very careful. I walk into her preschool one day to find the director and her teachers telling me congratulations with big smiles on their faces. I used to work as a preschool teacher here, so a lot of these people were close friends of mine. I asked them what they're congratulating me for, and they tell me that my daughter announced to everyone that mommy has a little sister in her tummy. I laughed it off and told them that I was sorry to disappoint them, but that just wasn't true. My daughter and I went home and talked about it. I told her mommy didn't have a baby in her tummy, and she just kept pointing at my belly and saying, "Yes, you do," as if I was lying to her. A few days later, I wake up to something touching my belly. My daughter has the bottom of my shirt pulled up with her head resting on my belly while she rubs it gently and says, "Baby sister, what are you doing hiding in there?" It was really sweet, and I just assumed that she really wanted a little sister. She had never expressed any interest in having a sibling prior to this, and we never discussed it. We had the talk again, and she got really upset with me and told me that she has seen her before and that she is in there. She told me that her sister looks different than us and has blonde hair and blue eyes with little holes in her cheeks, aka dimples. My daughter, husband, and I all have very dark hair, chocolate brown eyes, and no dimples. I talk to her about wanting a sibling and tell her that when I finish school we will try to give her a little brother or sister. Again, she's frustrated and yelling, "I already have a sister!" I was expecting my period to start within the next week like clockwork. It didn't. I took a pregnancy test and just stared at the faint positive result for what felt like forever. I was completely in shock. I was on birth control, so immediately called my OBGYN, and they saw me the next day. It was estimated that I was 4 weeks and 6 days pregnant. I gave birth to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl with the sweetest dimples. This experience has always blown my mind. I lived in a haunted apartment. It was 2 rooms, but one of the rooms was locked, and I didn't have the key. So I only had one small room as a kitchen, dining room, and bedroom, and a screened-in porch. There were 2 especially freaky events. One night, my girlfriend slept over, and she woke up in the middle of the night and said that she saw the bathroom door open and a shadowy figure standing in the bathroom staring at her. The bathroom was right across from the locked room. Another time, I was jerked awake by the fire alarm going off, just blaring. But when I went to unplug it, the alarm stopped and no other alarm in the building was going off. A lot of things that happened could have been just my neighbors, but the way they happened was, well, weird. I would hear knocking. It sounded like someone tapping a spoon on a counter, coming from the downstairs apartment. It could have been my neighbor, but I'm not sure why she would do that every couple of minutes for hours on end, or in the middle of the night for that. I would also hear knocking on the walls. It sounded like someone tapping their way up the wall, like they were looking for a stud. I would also hear this weird moaning or howling that I couldn't trace the source of. Again, it could have been like the neighbor's dog or something, but it didn't sound like it was coming from her apartment. The apartment across from me had 3 tenants in a year, I think because it was just as or more haunted than mine. I had, I think, a unique way of coping. I named the ghost Pete, after a previous tenant's mail I would get from time to time, and I tried talking to him, basically treating him like a roommate I wasn't friends with. My girlfriend was much more freaked out by the situation than me, and basically stopped coming over for a few months, so I wasn't there much anyway. When I was, I felt like talking to Pete made the atmosphere of the whole place much more friendly. I also left out a sheet of paper with, quote, Pete's notes written on it, and told him that if he had any problems, just write them down. I still don't know if I quite believe in ghosts, though I find the supernatural fascinating. But that experience did push me closer to the science doesn't know everything about the universe camp. In my last year of high school, I took classes at the local community college for college and high school credit. I was 17 at the time, and there was one kid who happened to be in 2 of my classes, a communications class and then a psychology class. He was in a group with me for a project in our communications class, and we exchanged emails to keep in contact. I'm a pretty friendly person and easy to get along with, and I assumed he mistook my friendly nature as romantic interest. He asked me if I had a Facebook. I said no, not really, I had a private one that I rarely ever checked, so I told him not to bother adding me. He then started showing up outside of other classes I was taking, but it was a small campus, so I shrugged it off and assumed I just had never noticed him there before. Then he started telling me about how he found me on Facebook even after I told him not to look for me, and why haven't I accepted his friend request yet. It was at this point I learned he was 25 and he was fully aware that I was 17 and still in high school. He also was very Mormon and went out of his way to talk to me about his religion despite the fact I told him I was atheist as well as my family. He was showing up at more and more places then, like my favorite coffee shop or the grocery store when I was with my friends. He had made sure to sit right next to me or behind me in both classes we had together. After class would let out at 7 p.m., he would run after me to try to talk, and despite my one-worded answers and less than friendly demeanor at this point, he wouldn't leave me alone. His questions then became more personal. He was asking me if I was seeing anyone, or if I wasn't, and why not, etc. The breaking point for me was when I would be the first to leave class to try to get to my car before he could catch up to me. He would then run after me and grab my arm in an attempt to talk to me. It was at that moment I realized this wasn't just an awkward dude being awkward, but that he wasn't afraid to physically hurt me. I told a girl in my class and she ended up walking with me to my car every night afterwards. I didn't go out anymore, and soon after the school year ended, I went to college out of state where I now live full-time. I've scrubbed all social media and all of my friends are aware not to give out my info to anyone. I'm really lucky that I could move and cut off all contact before it escalated even further, but I'm very wary and hesitant to give out any new information when I meet people. Bonus, this dude couldn't drive a car, and I saw him being picked up and dropped off by his mother on occasion, meaning that all of those, quote, instances of us running into each other were him asking his mom to drop him off to stalk me. This was some 15 years ago, but I'll do my best to remember the sequence of events. The person in question is my ex. We were together for over a year when I ended the relationship. There was cheating, creepiness, terminal deadbeatness, and some early stalker signs that I should have noticed but wrote off as caring. I didn't have the money to move far away from him, so I took an apartment in the same apartment complex because they would waive my security deposit, as I already had another lease there anyway. It was right after I moved that he obtained the key. From what I can assume, he took one of my keys from my key ring when he was dropping off some belongings that I had left when I moved out. Over the next week is when I started to notice things in my apartment were different than when I had left for work. The blinds would be changed, he used my toilet and didn't flush it. Generally, it just felt like things were off. This continued for about a month. It wasn't every day that things were weird, but a few times a week. Eventually, one of my neighbors informed me that someone had been hanging around outside at night. He had spoken with him, and my ex tried to question him about me. Apparently, he also spoke with several of my other neighbors as well. He tried to become friends with some sketchy couple who lived in the apartment downstairs from me. One day, I came home from work in the early evening. I was a server at a restaurant directly across from my apartment, so my routine wasn't exactly varied or hard to follow, but I didn't always get home at the exact same time. So I get home and I head for a quick pee. While I'm doing my business, I hear the faintest whisper of noise from the shower, and while I was sitting on the toilet, I pulled back the curtain. I don't remember exactly what I expected to see. Nothing, I guess. But there was my ex crouched in the shower with a camera, to which he said, "Surprise!" Surprise? Quick thinking on his part, I guess. I was certainly surprised. There was a lot of, "What are you doing in my shower? How did you get in my apartment?" The blatant lies that followed are not in my recollection, but I'm sure you can imagine the types of stories that a person can come up with on the fly to sound mildly plausible, except you know they're BS because they're clearly just BS. The door was unlocked. I stopped by to see if you wanted to get dinner, and the door was open, so I let myself in to wait for you. Things like that. Plausible in some strange way, but yet, no. Even more no, because he had a camera with him. And in that moment, all the weirdness from the past months just slips into my brain. So, yada yada, he leaves. I call the sheriff and the apartment manager. The manager came and changed my locks that night, and the sheriff came and took a report. After the shower incident, he still didn't really get with the program. He continued to lurk around outside of my apartment, stopping at my job, showing up at places that he shouldn't have been, or even at friends' homes far away that he had never met and wouldn't know how to get to unless he was actively following me. At this point, it was aggressive stalking. There was some incident involving him trying to kick in doors of my friends' homes. With my police reports in hand, I went down to the court and filed the request for a restraining order. This was served to him quite quickly, although I don't remember the time frame involved between filling out the details and when it was executed. Within 30 minutes of being served that order, though, my phone was ringing and it was from a woman calling on his behalf, which was a violation of the order. She said that she was his girlfriend and there was a big misunderstanding on my part. No, honey, I'm not the one that was misunderstanding the situation. That would be you. I called the police and they arrived and asked where he would be at this time. I sat at work and provided them the location. They went to arrest him. His time served wasn't very long. He did a work release program or something like that, and it didn't ever really seem like he was in jail. The one other really noteworthy thing that prompted a visit from the sheriff was that before one of my court dates, I went out to find my car wouldn't start. I inspected it and found something disconnected inside, and on the ground next to my car was a pin from where he was working. The cops couldn't really conclude that it was from him or deliberate and not just a car malfunction, but I knew. Eventually, mentally, he moved on to new prey and forgot about me, I guess. After a few years, I moved out of state and never returned to Florida. I still seek him out online to block his profiles even though it has been 15 years. You never know with people like that what's in their brain. But a preemptive block across all social media seemed wise. Okay, I haven't told anyone this story since I was a child, because when I told my cousins what was happening, it scared them really bad, and I got my second only whooping with my belt from my dad. As an adult, I don't mention it because I just don't know what it was, and I don't want other adults to think I'm nuts. When I was in second grade, I woke up one summer night, dead of night, to a woman floating through my window into my bedroom. Oddly, I wasn't that scared. I just sat up and asked, "What are you doing here?" I remember that she answered me, but oddly enough, the next morning I couldn't remember what she said or even what her voice sounded like. I couldn't even remember what she looked like. So next I said to her, in true 8-year-old fashion, "Well, you better get going because my dad might wake up and then he'll get mad." She slipped out of my already cracked open bedroom door and I went back to sleep. Sounds like sleep paralysis, right? Wrong. The next day I was really excited that I had my own fairy godmother and I named her Crystal. I thought in my head, "Please come back and wake me up at dawn so we can talk." I shit you not, the next morning, just as it was getting light outside, I hear someone whispering my name. I realized that this shit was real, and that she was a ghost, and I froze. I stayed as still as I could, not even able to breathe. I just prayed as hard as I could. Go away, go away, go away. I could feel her right next to my head. As I'm typing this, tears are actually coming into my eyes. Okay, happened once. Coincidence, right? Nope. Every time I would get brave and say out loud to her before going to bed in my room, "Okay, come this time, I swear I won't get scared." She would come, whispering my name, and I would almost shit my pants in fear and never open my eyes. So at this point I'm thinking, still could be night terrors, right? I mean, our eyes do have receptor senses to light that wake us up, thus causing me to wake up at dawn and hallucinate this shit. Here's where shit gets real though. Next summer I tell a friend that this is going on while we were camping together. She doesn't believe me, says to me, "Okay, ask her to come tonight then." We're sleeping in the same tent and my friend wants me to see for herself. So I do, and lo and behold, at dawn, I hear her, calling my name and my friend's name. We don't move, she leaves, and we both sit up. My friend heard her too. She freaks out, tells her parents later that day sobbing, and I get in trouble for scaring the shit out of kids with ghost stories. Later that summer I told my cousin this story, and before that night she freaks out, tells her mom, and I get my ass beat for telling ghost stories again. I got pissed about said beating, and I angrily said out loud, "I got in trouble because of you, and I never want to see you ever again." And I haven't. Ever. Thank fucking God. And I just don't think about it anymore, and never when I'm alone at night. This happened to me a few months back. I leave work at 5 p.m. every day. As usual, 5 p.m. is rush hour as everyone is leaving work. I get in my car and start the 1 hour, 15-minute drive home. I usually get in around 6:15, give or take 5 minutes, depending on traffic. In this time whilst driving, I usually call my partner to talk or to see if she needs anything from the shops on my way back. I know these roads like the back of my hands, having driven them for almost 9 years at this point. I finished my call to my partner after around 10 minutes of driving. As she requested something from the shop, I was preparing to stop as it's not far from where I am. As I turn a corner, I'm suddenly in shock. I'm at the very end of my road. No skipping, nothing jolty, just smooth transition as if one road was connected to another. At first, I think I had done that autopilot driving thing you hear about, where you just kind of lose track of time. But when I checked the clock, I almost fainted. It was 5:20. Phone, watch, and car all said 5:20. I pulled up outside my house and my partner comes out and says, "Huh? What was this supposed to be, some crap prank? I just got off the phone to you and you didn't mention you left early." I said that I didn't and explained what had just happened. I then called my business partner to ask him if we left early by mistake and he said no, not at all. I explained to him that I was already home and he said, "What? No way." He was still driving home and he only lived 30 minutes from work. Later on in the evening, we were so baffled we checked CCTV and confirmed that we left at 5:04 p.m. The last email that I sent was at 4:42. We certainly did not leave early. What could explain this? It's never happened to me before or since. I'm a 21-year-old female and I live with my grandparents in a large city on a busy road. I was just in bed when I heard the doorbell ring, and I was about to answer it, but my grandpa got to the door before me. I'm now so glad that he did. I couldn't see the front door from the hallway, but when he opened it, I heard a woman say, "Hi, my name is Taylor. I think I know you." I didn't recognize that name, and my grandpa didn't either, because he told her that he definitely didn't know her. He asked how he could help her, and I heard him open the door wider, and then her quick footsteps as she just ran away. After she left, I came out to ask my grandpa what happened. He told me about the interaction with a puzzled look, and I immediately recognized it as suspicious. We have a Ring doorbell, so we pulled up the video it had taken. It showed a young woman covered in tattoos approaching our yard. As she walks up, she whistles loudly to someone off camera. I watch as my grandpa opens the door and she says that she thinks she knows him. Now, my grandpa is a retired police officer, and tonight he happened to be wearing his t-shirt with the name of our city's police department. When he opened the door wider, she must have noticed his shirt because her eyes widened and she just runs away. I watch as the video shows her holding up her arms crossed in an X as she runs away, and a few seconds later a man crawls out from behind my car parked outside and follows her. Then the woman can be heard whistling again as they walk down the block. My grandpa called the non-emergency police line to report suspicious activity, and 2 officers arrived 15 minutes later to hear out our statements and watch the video. They seemed to agree that these were probably 2 addicts working together, casing out the neighborhood to see which houses they could break into. Since there was no proof of a crime committed, the officers gave us an email to send the video to and left. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I, a 5'3", 100-pound, 21-year-old young woman, had been the one to answer the door, instead of my grandpa, who was a 6'2", ex-military retired police officer. So, sketchy couple lurking around my neighborhood? Let's not meet. Standard not me, but my little sister had an attempted kidnapping. This was back when I was probably 8 to 10 years old, so my sister was 4 to 6 years old. My memory isn't great from back then, but this is etched in my brain. My family lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my slightly older cousins and their family were visiting from Puerto Rico for a few weeks, so naturally they wanted to go see the city. This was a weekday, so my dad was working, and my aunt and uncle decided to go up to wine country for the day or something like that. That left my mother to drive and take care of 4 kids under the age of 14 years old in the city. The beginning of the day went well, and we all walked around, doing the touristy stuff like eating taffy, going to Fisherman's Wharf, and looking at the sea lions. We decided to stop for lunch at a small place near where the ferry launches to go to Alcatraz prison, and proceeded to sit and eat on some long cement bench things. One of my cousins and I ate our food and started goofing off, chasing each other around. You know, being the stupid kids that everyone around probably hated. My mother, being the saint that she is, was probably just letting us burn off some steam and let us play, but kept an eye out. Now, there's 4 of us, mind you, and 2 of us are being brats, so keeping an eye out on everything was probably not the easiest task, especially when we're all in different directions. I started running back towards my mother, who was smiling in my direction. This is where the day turns. I'm watching all of this happen from 20 to 25 yards away. My sister, while my mom was looking at me, stood up and started walking along the cement bench and was maybe 5 feet from my mother, who had no idea that she had gotten up. This next part is etched in my brain. A middle-aged, maybe 35-year-old woman in a pink top walks right past my mom and to my sister, picked her up from behind and just started walking off. My sister didn't make a sound, and I don't even think that she knew what was going on. When you're that age, you're always being picked up, and I'm sure she just assumed it was mom. I was watching a strange woman walk away with my baby sister. That's when my mom turned around, didn't see my sister behind her, and instead in the arms of some lady walking away. Now, they say to never get in the way of a mama bear and her cubs, and this was no different. My mother dove on them, grabbing my sister and pushing the lady away. My mom began yelling and screaming at this lady who pretended she could only speak Chinese. The lady just ended up running off before anyone even thought about calling the cops. My mom was just crying and holding my sister, and my cousins and I were just standing there in disbelief. Since then, my mother had been even more of a hawk on us when out in public until we were old enough to go out alone. But this whole thing could have ended up terrible. I could only imagine what someone would want a young girl for. This world is a fucked up place, and people like this lady deserve to be in hell. I became more vigilant and vowed to protect my sister no matter what. Whenever I'm with her now, which isn't often as I live away on my own, I still don't let her out of my sight. There's creeps everywhere, and she's still just a kid at 18. Before I start, this was around 4-ish years ago. Since then, I've had several incidences where something like this happens, and I remember this story again. I've told it to friends, family, therapists, but nobody is sure what caused it, if it was a sudden panic attack or something like that. But I'd like to think I saw something I wasn't supposed to. It was around 9 to 10 p.m. in Canadian fall, so it was already pitch black outside. I had my window wide open and my curtains drawn back with my desk and laptop beside it. I might have gotten bored or just hungry, so I figured I would go downstairs, get a snack, and come back up. My door faces my window, so as soon as it opens, I see outside. I have a habit of closing my door when I leave, which makes it a real pain to balance plates and cups while trying to open it. I came back up the stairs with my plate, and I was hit with a random feeling of unease. I couldn't pinpoint it, so I just ignored it and opened my door. This part is hard to explain a bit, but the moon was right outside my window. No, not the regular size moon. I mean, as if the moon had inflated massively and was standing right outside, looking into my room and directly at me, faceless. I panicked and the dread hit. I wasn't supposed to be here. It didn't want me here, and I have to leave. I felt it communicate this to me telepathically. Not exact words, but as soon as I saw it, I knew and closed the door. I started to freak out and hyperventilate a little, and it took me a few minutes to calm myself down. I opened my door again, and the moon was back in the sky, and there was no presence of the moon that I encountered again. I felt relief. I closed my windows and blinds daily after that. I was running on the trails at the Nathan Hale homestead, which was an 18th century farmhouse and property of a Revolutionary War hero. It was in Connecticut. It was only about a 10-minute drive from my grandmother's lake house. I could not find a map of the trails anywhere online, and there didn't seem to be any signage at the place, just a bunch of random mountain bike trails in the woods. I was only going to run 4 miles, so I estimated that I would run for about 30 minutes, using my watch to keep myself on track. So I ran around the trails for a while and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. It was about 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, and the only sounds were the distant hums of Route 31, birds chirping, and the occasional squirrel or deer that scampered off whenever I came near. The trails seemed to wind around a lot, and if not for my better-than-average directional skills, I could have easily gotten lost. About 20 minutes in, I saw something strange about 50 meters off. A finely polished, light-colored wooden coffin. I was a little weirded out, to say the least, and waited until I got closer for a better look. I rounded a corner where several old tree stumps blocked my view, only to find that the coffin had disappeared completely. Where it should have been was a clump of ferns. This was really odd. I turned around shortly thereafter and made my way back to the car. I was maybe a half mile out when I heard a very distinctive knocking on a nearby tree to the rhythm of Shave and a Haircut. Talk, 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 talk. Except no 2 bits part. I was a little spooked but chalked it up to a woodpecker or something. However, not 30 seconds later, there it was on a completely different tree up ahead somewhere. Talk, 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 talk. I picked up the pace. The trail widened a little, and I could see way ahead to the entrance to the parking lot where my car was. There it was again, though, on a tree seemingly right next to me. Talk, 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 talk. I truly started freaking out and started to book it back to the lot. I was nearing the opening when time seemed to slow down. All of a sudden, it felt like the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. The birds stopped singing, and my simple Timex watch started to malfunction, making all sorts of beeping noises, and the numbers were glitching on the screen. The beat sounded impossibly loud this time, like it was hacked into every surrounding tree with a hand axe. Talk, 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 talk. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as I anticipated hearing the 2 bits refrain, and perhaps worse. I burst into the parking lot and everything went back to normal. The temperature was back in the mid-70s and birds were chirping away. I looked at my watch, only to discover that it had gone completely blank. I stood there and stared at it until it flashed 12, Monday, 1/01, January 1st. My watch had reset itself. It had never done this before. I got into the car and started the engine. The clock on the radio display read 12. That couldn't be right. It should have been around 9:30 or 9:45 at the latest. I put her into reverse and backed up to where I could clearly make my way out to the main road. However, as I was about to throw the car into drive as it sat there, I heard a sharp rapping sound out the back window, like something hitting it with their knuckles. Tuck, tuck. There was no one else in the parking lot when I finished my run. No cars, no nothing. I didn't dare look back and hightailed it back to my grandmother's house. I have no idea what could have caused this series of events to happen, and I still can't explain it to this day. I'm still being stalked because he's never been violent, and the police seem to think it's no big deal. I'll try to keep this story short. 10 years ago, I started playing a video game and I met a guy. He was nice, but definitely not my type, as I was figuring out where I was on the Kinsey scale at the time. We became friends, and he started trying to date me. I informed him he wasn't my type, but I really did want to be friends. He accepted that, and we were friends, but he would consistently try to roleplay our characters in this game being in a relationship. I was okay with it. It was just a game. A few years passed, and we were pretty good friends. I've now figured out that I'm bisexual, and I'm cool with that. As I've lived in a major city at the time, he happened to be passing through and asked if we could meet up to hang out for a little while. I said sure, and we went to my favorite bar and had a few drinks. Then I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in my bed, naked, and he informed me that we just had amazing sex and I had confessed my love to him. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I had been drugged and raped, so I convinced myself that I must have feelings for him, except I suddenly hated him with every fiber of my being. We were together for 3 months, and then I did my best to vanish completely. I moved across the country, got a new phone, ceased talking to 90% of my family who liked him. I changed my username in the game and acted like nothing was going on. However, one of the administrators of said game let it slip about my name change, and after about 6 months he found me. He started messaging my character all the time. He got a hold of my in-game friends and got my new email as well. He used my family's email addresses to get them to give up my new phone number and address. And he was there, all the time. I called the police, and they said since he wasn't violent, it was no big deal. Finally, I moved to Chicago, and I married a man who could break him in half. Now he only comes around sometimes. I'm sorry this is getting a little bit disjointed, because talking about this still upsets me a lot. I was almost kidnapped when I was 3 years old. My dad was out of town on a work trip, so it was just my mom taking care of me, my older brother, and my younger brother. We just got home from the grocery store, and my mom was in the midst of carrying in the groceries as well as trying to put my baby brother in his crib, and she had thought that I had gone inside to play with my older brother. I ended up staying in the front yard playing by myself, and my mom didn't notice, which is surprising because she is very overprotective and hyper-aware. A big white van pulled up and a middle-aged male driver asked me if I could help him find his dog. He told me that he knows that I have a dog, meaning he had likely been watching me for a bit to know that I have a dog, and just wanted to find his and bring her home. He just kept talking about his dog, and I was really hesitant, but kept walking closer to his car and asking, "What?" as I could barely hear him, and now worried about his poor missing dog. My older brother, who was only 5 years old at the time, happened to open the front door looking at me at the same time that I was just a few feet away from his car. He immediately knew something was wrong with the situation and yelled my name and asked me to come inside. He was terrified, but I didn't move, so he knew he had no choice but to come to me. He ran to me, picked me up, and as that was happening, my mom peered out the front door, realized what was happening, and came running out screaming. The guy obviously got scared and sped away. My brother definitely saved my life, because if he didn't call my name, I likely would have walked close enough to the car for the guy to be able to grab me. My mom got part of the license plate number, called the police, and I had to tell them the story several times. I barely remember, but my mom has told me that story. I still remember my mom holding me and crying, though, and me feeling so bad for scaring her. The guy was never caught, but safe to say I was terrified of being alone from that point on. We ended up moving shortly after, and I became very attached to my parents for the next few years. I would cry every single day they dropped me off at school, and I would always want to be around other adults rather than any children. I eventually grew out of that, but it left me pretty traumatized for years. This happened when I was 17. When I was still living at my childhood home, I was sneaking out late at night to meet some friends. I went through the back door of the house, and as I turned to face the door, I could just feel somebody watching me. I thought I was busted. I turned to look who had caught me, and saw a totally monochrome figure. Their hair was completely black, like blacker than black. Their face was like static, washed over white and gray, and they were wearing a dress that was between the two colors. No facial features, just the silhouette of a young girl facing me. I reached for the door as fast as I could, and when I went to shut it, it closed very quickly on me. I bolted through my yard and onto the street and couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. I stayed at my friend's that night. Soon after this happened, I was up late one night with my mom watching a movie. My dad had just passed away. We finished our movie and said goodnight after turning the TV, stereo receiver, and DVD player off. After a short amount of time in bed, I'm jarred awake by the sound of static, with the speakers cranked up and the TV on with no input. My mom and I are in the hallway, surprised to see that we had both been awoken to an empty house. A few years ago, when I was 23-ish and graduated from college, I finally told my family about the first occurrence. Before I'm able to finish my description of the ghost, my mom finishes it for me, telling me that her and her friend used to see a little girl in our backyard playing in a sundress. She said that she looked maybe 12. Our neighbor, who was the original owner, shared a story with us about the family that originally bought the house after it was built. It was a young family whose daughter passed away from leukemia. She would have been about the right age. Looking back, the girl wasn't scary or harmful, and my sister had the same impression. To this day, I believe what we saw, and haven't seen anything like it ever since. I also want to say that my dog used to scare the crap out of me because he would randomly stare down the hallway to my sister's room, and he would growl with his hair on end. It would always freak me out, and I never connected the two until some time after seeing the ghost, or whatever it may have been. I just read another story on here about somebody having an encounter and their dog possibly saving their life, and it reminded me of my own story with my pup. I rescued a pit bull from a neglectful family. She was skin and bones when she came home and extremely submissive. After a week of love, affection, and food, she was the most amazing dog I have ever met. The softest, cuddliest baby who wouldn't even play fight with me unless she was under a blanket and didn't know it was me. I needed to do a quick late-night run to my local shop. There's a 40-minute round-trip route on main roads with houses, or a 15-minute round-trip route through an alleyway that wraps around the back of a school field. This alleyway has no street lamps, but I hadn't ever heard of anything bad happening, so I didn't really think anything of it. So I set out with my dog in tow. Just before we reached the entrance, she stood still as a rock. I gently tried to usher her to follow me, but she refused. When I took my headphones off, I realized that she was softly growling and that I could hear a group of male voices coming from the alley. They soon came close enough to where I could see them, and I think that there was around 5 or 6 of them. This was during COVID, so they were all wearing masks with their hoods up. My mom always told me that if I found myself in a situation like this, to not act scared. Being scared shows that you're an easy target. With that in mind, I tugged firmly on my dog's lead to get her to follow me. She stuck to my side, literally pressing her body against my leg as I walked. She was quietly growling the whole time. The men had stopped and were standing slightly off the path to one side at this point. They were talking quietly amongst themselves as we walked by. I couldn't really hear much as my heartbeat was pounding in my ears and my gut was screaming at me. Once I knew I was at the point where the darkness of the alley made me essentially invisible, I heard one of them raise their voice slightly and said, "Nah, that's a pit," in a way that sounded like he was disagreeing. Now, they could have just been discussing the breed of my dog. That's a likely scenario. But the gut feeling I had while walking past, and for the duration of my walk through the alley, makes me believe otherwise. I think that these men were discussing possibly robbing me, or worse. And my soft baby, who was literally scared of her own reflection, deterred them due to being a quote aggressive breed. It's safe to say that we walked the long way home. So, creepy group of men, let's not meet again. During my time at uni, me and my ex-girlfriend, close friend at the time, had a weird glitch-like experience that always baffled us. We were in our second year, and we were in the gathering hall room, which was also the cafeteria/waiting area for certain things. It's usually very busy and noisy. Furthermore, there was an announcement held in this area when we were there, and during this time, everyone was waiting for the announcement to happen. My friend and I were so involved with our convo, we kind of blocked out all the external noise going on around us and stayed invested in our conversation. My friend was talking about videos at the time, and she left her phone on record without realizing. Fast forward a few minutes of our conversation, we noticed everyone is completely silent and just looking at us, and then the announcement starts. We were so embarrassed, but we didn't notice everyone had gone silent, and it felt like we spoke for 5 or 10 seconds. Regardless, it was an embarrassing moment. Fast forward a couple of hours and we go on with our day and return to our student house. Then my friend comes to see me and tells me that she had come across the most uncanny thing and can't describe how she feels. She shows the video and I listen to it thinking nothing of it. The video starts when she mistakenly left it on record, and it just has us invested in our discussion, and there's a lot of background noise with people speaking in the hall, and this goes on for a few minutes and I start to get really bored. I continue watching but kinda bitch about it because it's just a black video, the camera was facing the table, and it was just us talking in a noisy background with the occasional tapping of fingers on the table. I still watch completely unfazed, and then my friend says, "Did you not notice it?" I'm still utterly confused and ask her what she was talking about. She rewinds the video and instructs me to listen at a certain point. All of this segment is in the noisy hall. I watched this 10-second segment roughly 3 times, and the moment I realized what she was directing me to pay attention to, my tone changed and I felt a huge chill. "Everyone is quiet," she said. At this point in the video, everyone suddenly goes radio silent, and it's just as if we're being completely watched/listened to for the next 2 minutes of the video. Then again, suddenly, everyone else's time unfreezes, it appears, and a friend on another table alerts us to be quiet, and the announcement begins in the video. In the video, since the silence began, my friend alerting us is the first sound other than us talking. We spoke to our friend, and he told us that we were speaking for like a few seconds while everyone was quiet. But then, when we showed him the video and aligned everything, he even felt confused, but he disregarded it. I never knew how to take it, but the audio from the video is just chilling. It's not some form of noise cancellation from her iPhone, because it was picking up all the audio for a good amount of time. It's just this brief period where everyone else is silent, and it's just us talking. It's hard to explain because I already feel like I'm missing points to explain the experience, but it is what it is. We were both fascinated and terrified of it, It was just as if the world and their souls stopped, and they decided to focus in on our conversation. I went to go visit my dad out of state because I was just really needing to get away from my extremely toxic mom and her family for a while. Toward the end of my vacation, I was like, I'm a legal adult, there's nothing stopping me from just staying here. And at that moment I decided it was better for my mental health and overall well-being to just stay near my dad. My mom flipped her shit. I told her, I just really want some space. When I'm ready to talk to you, I'll call you. But they have no sense of boundaries, so she and my half-sister consistently called my dad's house trying to get me to come back to live with them. My sister would call, hang up when I wouldn't answer, and then call again right away so that there would be 30 missed calls on our caller ID in the span of 30 minutes. When I wouldn't pick up the phone, my sister switched to bombarding my MySpace inbox with one insane message after another at 3 a.m. I started noticing weird things around town. Cars I didn't recognize would slow down by me when I was out walking. People that I had just met would suddenly know things about me and ask about my mom like they were trying to get info. My mom actually called out of the blue one day and asked about my hair. When I lived with her, she always made me keep it long as a means of control. My hair is very thick, heavy, and on the dry side, so it was always a nightmare to keep it down past my waist like she wanted. After I decided to stay with my dad, one of the first things that I did was chop off my hair to be super short. It felt great getting rid of it all, and I found out after all this time my hair was actually curly. I never knew because all the hair weighted down my curls. So, when my mom called and gave me this really bitchy, "How long is your hair now?" I just told her, I cut it because it's my hair. Why? Do you have people out here spying on me? She sputtered, What? No? I just asked because I'm your mom, and I could just feel that you cut your hair because moms always know stuff like that about their children. Yeah, sure, whatever. After a year, my dad and I moved to a different house and never gave my mom or her family the new address. I never filled out a change of address form, but when my maternal grandmother sent me this really weird card in the mail, she addressed it to the old house. The post office wrote my new address on it and sent it back to her, and she resent it to my new place. After that, random cars would start showing up in our driveway and just sit there. Our driveway wasn't lit. It was on a main road with a lot of traffic, and if you didn't know the driveway was there, you'd miss it. My friends would miss it, even though they knew it was coming up, or they started parking on the side street because my driveway was such a pain in the ass. This wasn't the type of place you pulled into to turn around. Yet, here we are with these cars parking outside in our drive. My stepmom caught one as soon as she opened the door to ask, "Can I help you?" The car just ended up booking it and went off down the street. I had a job at a fast food restaurant to pay for college, and things were good until one day someone comes in and says in the sing-song voice, "Oh hi, it's so good to see you." I look and there's this woman standing on the other side of the counter, and it took me forever to recognize her as my mom's sister-in-law. I didn't talk to her, but apparently she called my maternal grandmother and mom right away to let me know that she found me and where I was working. Then, mom packs up her entire family, her parents, my half-siblings, my insane sister, her husband, their kids, everybody, and drove halfway across the country to show up at my job unannounced to, I don't fucking know what, but they were filming me with a video camera, and with a whole crowd of them, I have a feeling that my mom was attempting to gang kidnap me because she kept trying to get me to come out from behind the counter while they were all crowded around. I refused and wouldn't answer with anything but, "I'm at work and you need to leave." There's really no ending to this because 13 years later I'm still dealing with their bullshit. It's not as frequent as it used to be, but every once in a while they can't help but try to send me messages through whatever means they can try to contact me in, like LinkedIn messages or something just to be fucking annoying. Thankfully, I have a really great assistant that runs my work Facebook page, so not only does she catch the crazy so I don't have to see it, she gets a taste of their insanity firsthand, so there's some validation there. I used to be in the military, and the training bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we had zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? I mean, human error and all. Then came the instance that freaked everyone out. It was one night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us were drifting off to sleep and were lying in our beds, etc. Suddenly, he heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and pretended to sleep. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him, at the other side of his bed, going, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I would dismiss this as a figment of his imagination, except about 5 other people around him heard it as well, including me. Creepier still, there was no one there, and it was the voice of a little girl that said it. For reference, our training camp was in the middle of an island, and was set up away from the main admin blocks. The islands have been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there was definitely no civilians around, let alone kids. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of female hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black. Under his pillow was a note. "Remember me?" Now, as I said, we were in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there was no female recruits or personnel on the island. Our bunks were locked up for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea that this incident even happened. We never spoke about it after that night. It still chills me to the bone thinking about it. This happened this morning, and I feel like I'm going crazy. I never had an episode where I questioned reality, and I'm not under any mind-altering substance. I barely drink alcohol, like once every 3 months, and I only have a cup of coffee every morning. So to understand what happened, you need to know a little about me. I love fantasy and science fiction. I've been an avid reader since I was 11, and one of the things that always captured my mind was the topic of time travel. So, since I was young, I don't remember exactly when I started doing it, I developed a code to tell myself in case I time traveled, or if I ever encountered another me. I'm actually a little embarrassed about doing this, so it's not something I actually tell people often. Until today, not even my wife knew about this. The code has always been the same, but I wasn't actually serious about it. It was just something of a private joke, only for myself when I felt my mind drift whenever I read a time travel story. My code consists of 3 words, 1 in Spanish, my mother tongue, 1 in English, and 1 word I invented myself. My wife is kind of the opposite. She doesn't dislike fantasy or science fiction, but it's not something she really cares about. She can watch a good movie or read a fantasy book once in a while, but it's not something that defines her. So this morning we're having breakfast, as usual. Our son, who is 2, is having some difficulty learning to talk, and sometimes it's really hard to understand him. We're in the process of stimulating him and teaching him animals and colors. We usually get really excited whenever he learns a new word. So there we were eating, and my son babbles something. To my ears, it was nothing but usual baby talk with no sense. But my wife goes and says something like, "Aw, look, a new word," and gets all surprised. Was that English? We're both Latinos, we speak Spanish. And then she goes and repeats my actual code in order. First Spanish, then English, and then she says that I didn't understand the last one he said, and goes to say my actual invented word. Like actually the word. There's no way to mistake it for something else in any other language. Sort of like one's username they would use online. At this point, I'm really freaked out. I'm looking at her paralyzed in fear, and she notices something is wrong. It took me a while to calm myself and explain it all to her, and she swears that our son said those 3 words, and I'm sure that I only heard random babble. If it wasn't for the fact that I was actually freaked out and trembling, I'm sure that she would have thought that I was joking, but none of us can really explain what happened. I wasn't personally kidnapped, but my oldest daughter technically was. It was summer and my daughter had to be around 3 years old at the time. She's 9 now. I had her when I was young, 17, and her father wasn't too present in her life. He left her when she was around 1 year old. I didn't hear from him for nearly 2 years. He came over unexpectedly, and I didn't feel comfortable about his sudden presence considering he ditched our kid for a long time. Anyways, I let him in and reintroduced her to her father. Everything was okay. They were playing in the living room while I was preparing lunch. He then asked if he could take her to the park. I said no, not yet. We can go together once I finish making lunch. He was gone for over a year and I wasn't going to let him be unsupervised. He then asked if they could play on the front of the patio. I said okay only because I can see and hear everything outside from the kitchen. Again, everything is fine. I see her giggling and playing. It only took one split second. I went to pick up the phone because it was ringing. I go to take a peek outside and I see no one. I was about to go instant panic. I stopped, took a breath, and figured, okay, maybe they're all upstairs with Grandma. Nope, not upstairs. I checked my room. Nothing. Checked the basement. Nothing. I was starting to get scared. I put on my shoes and started heading out the door. I was so scared and I was crying and calling out for my daughter, hoping I will see or hear her. I went to the stores near my area. Nothing again. I was close to the guys that worked at the shops and showed a pic of her and asked if they had seen her, but nothing. I started to make my way to the parks. At the first park there was nothing, but I did eventually spot them at the second park. As soon as I saw her, I ran right towards her, crying. I grabbed her so tight like I never wanted to let go. It was the scariest thing I had ever experienced. For the record, her bio father doesn't come to visit her after that. She hasn't seen or heard from him since she was 3 years old, and I'm glad. I would rather keep it this way. He's proven to me that he's extremely unstable. I wanted a prom date in 1986. What I ended up with was a fucking psychopath. He was abusive as hell, and it took me 4 years to get away from him safely. I'd go to the police, and they'd tell me that he just liked me and wanted to date me. I'd go to my parents, and they'd say, it's not our problem. I had to take extreme measures to get away from this guy. I had tried to break up with him a few times before. Once, he jumped off the roof of a shopping mall and hurt his leg. Another time, his friend called me and told me to look out of my bedroom window. There was Psycho Ass in a fucking tree with a rifle pointed at my little sister's bedroom window. I finally got rid of him in 1990 when he told me that only death would separate us. I faked an overdose of pills. I didn't take them all, but I made it look like I had. I knew I'd be found. My roommate took me to the ER, and I drank the fucking liquid charcoal. I told my psychiatrist on duty that my death was the only way to get rid of this guy. Yes, I wasn't thinking clearly, and yes, it was a shitty thing to fake. But finally, someone had listened to me and put me in touch with services and support so I could get away safely. He moves away at the end of that summer, and I'm free. Or am I? 1991, I get random shit in the mail. Carpet samples, samples of Depends, Elvis commemorative plates, just weird shit. I know it's him. I'm in my first apartment. The apartment across the hall opens up, and who moves in? That's right, Psycho Ass. The building is for sale. Who buys the fucking building? Psycho Ass. I'm not kidding. He bought my apartment building. No idea where or how he got the money. I moved out in the middle of the night, and I took my shit and ran. I get a new job, but I get fired because of a customer complaint. I point out that the complaint was from a time that I wasn't working. I get a new apartment. My landlord calls me a few weeks later into his office to ask if I really am turning tricks in my apartment. Weird shit like that keeps happening. He keeps popping up and undermining my life, my friends, and he tells anyone I date that he's going to kill them, that we're still dating and I'm cheating on him with the new guy. By 1996, I've moved halfway across the country. It was awesome. He had no idea where I was and I was so happy. Unfortunately, I had to move home in 1998, and he kept fucking with me. I would come home and all of my radio stations would be tuned one digit down, like 95.7 would be 95.5. There was an alarm clock in my closet that went off at 3 a.m. He let the air out of my tires. Thankfully, a cop ended up moving in upstairs, and that's when the fucking with stopped. I don't hear from him or see him until 2002. He fucking strolls into my work, and I worked at a store. I quit immediately after that. I'm married by that point, and I tell my husband what's up, and we end up moving. The last time I saw him was in 2008. I was dropping my son off at a day camp, and I hear my name across the street. It's Psycho Ass. He's got a camera with a long lens on it. I keep my cool, I ignore him, I go into the camp office and tell them that there's a guy across the street taking pictures of the kids as they're being dropped off. They end up calling the police. There's a bit of a dust-up, and he's thrown on the ground and driven off. That's the last I've heard or seen from him, and I hope that he rots. My abusive father got my mother to have my younger sister and I stay a night at our secretly abusive grandparents. By secretly abusive, I mean they were monsters to our mom but kept it hidden. We were still trying to finalize the divorce at the time, and our mom wasn't really mentally stable enough to really refuse us going there, especially for just one night, and our grandparents were nice to us for the time being. Our mother was horribly abused, and after the divorce, it took her about a year and a half before she actually started to recover, so I played my sister's advocate for anything she needed. Everything was fine for the first day and night, but in the morning my phone wasn't working. I hadn't known why, but I didn't think much of it. I just thought service was bad in the area. Then my father, who didn't swim with us the previous day, said he was going to go to the store to buy a swimsuit to join us. He left, and I didn't think he'd be gone for long. Mother was supposed to pick us up that afternoon anyway. Well, the day went by and my phone still wasn't working. Father was still gone and Mother wasn't here either. Our grandparents said that Mom said it was okay if we spent another night, and this is where I sensed something else was going on. I was really tired, and so was my sister, so we went to bed and I planned on figuring out what was really happening the following day. I asked my sister if she thought anything was off, and she said that she had a bad feeling about all of this from the start. The next morning I checked my phone to see if it was working again, but to no avail. Father was still gone, and my mother was still not present. Now, keep in mind that the phone that I had was a really old smartphone that could barely work, just text and stuff. Most of the time it wouldn't even send notifications if something was wrong with it or if I got a text, so I'd have to check all of my contacts to see if anything was new. There was still nothing from my mom or dad. That's when it hit me. My grandparents had everyone keep their phones in the kitchen so you wouldn't stay up, so someone could have easily tampered with it. I took out the back, and there was no SIM card. I never take out the SIM for any reason, so I immediately went into, quote, "this is a kidnapping" mode. I started raising hell all the time, throwing dishes, silverware, anything I could get my hands on. I would talk back, get loud, and consistently annoy. An hour or two into me flipping my shit, our mother was at the house banging on the door. I grabbed my sister, our electronics, swimsuits, spare clothes, and rushed out the door and into the car. Mom says one or two quick things, but I don't really remember clearly. Probably something along the lines of, quote, "don't you dare do anything with my kids again," or something like that. After we get home and calm down my sister, our mom tells me in private that they did everything they could to keep her away, even telling the person at the front gate to never let her in. My grandparents lived in a gated community. We were planning on taking legal action, but with us being super poor and them being super rich, we thought it wouldn't be worth the time. They got the divorce completely filed, we moved the hell out of the area, and we haven't heard from them since. It always seems to be the people you think you're safe with that'll try to kidnap you. And even though this wasn't a very violent one, it was still very scary to my little sister and I, me being 13 and her only 10. My grandfather was a bad man. He was an alcoholic, extremely violent, and even tried to kill my grandmother in front of their kids. One of his less horrible acts was abandoning my grandmother with their 6 kids, all under the age of 12. Some of his kids maintained minimal contact with him. He lived about 30 or 40 miles away from my grandmother and the 2 kids who stayed in the area. When he was in his 80s, he was hospitalized and then passed away in the middle of the night. In the morning, his oldest child, one of my aunts, went to the morgue to identify his body and fill out paperwork. On her way, she stopped by my grandmother's to break the news. When she came in, my grandmother said, "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." My grandmother had begun to show more signs of dementia, or just basic old age, and so the weird comments weren't too out of character. And my aunt assumed that while at the hospital, one of her siblings had already called their mother to tell her the news. My aunt shook it off and drove to the morgue. When she saw the death certificate, she was shocked to see that the time of death was listed at 12:10 a.m. On her way home, she stopped back at my grandmother's and asked her who had called her to tell her the news, and asked why she thought that he had died just past midnight. My grandmother said, "He came to see me at 12:30 and we talked for a spell. He wanted to apologize for all he had done and you kids. I think he made his peace and was able to move on, so I'm glad for that." My grandmother then resumed humming and doing a jigsaw puzzle. About 3 years ago, I, a 21-year-old female, was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job, and I remember being so excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at the time, and typically it was just my cook, a 20-something-year-old male, and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was nice. I can remember that it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance that I did at the time. I never could really trust my gut that much, because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I was feeling half the time was valid or not. I mention this because when it all went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I had started my shift that evening around 3 p.m. I said goodbye to the last waitress, and I was on my own with the cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10 to 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up and 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed this by asking, since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed that they had a red binder and a black pin. Remember this. I then went to tend to my other customers as there was a couple other tables I was waiting on. Once I brought out their food to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I actually found this to be normal, as this being the tourist vacation state that it is, it wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was reasonable for me to assume it was nothing, if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number of a realtor I knew closely and well, since I often went to church with her. There wasn't any other notable interactions I really had, aside from occasional small talk if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you were in the food industry, you would know that as a server, you don't really get breaks, just a lunchtime most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important. Now, I didn't really notice this at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing about 5 feet below, but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask me some personal questions, such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this, for some reason, was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all of her questions as best as I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She had told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said she needed pretty and young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was, and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they get paid $30K, she didn't specify the time length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid service and I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her or near that car. I declined yet again and said I was fine right where I was. I said that she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant, after which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the two men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them. Because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have, I laughed with him. At the end of the night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned the weird interaction to her. A panicked look came over her and she just sat there silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that, except for the red binder and the black pin I told you to remember. I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now, normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there to just eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. Well, I get into my apron and sit this gentleman down. He was well dressed, not in a suit or tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone, too. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and a black pin with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more, that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended to my tables. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat there and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said, no, not here. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how it was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told my cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to, quote, help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since then. I've told this story to several people and no one really believed me. They just awkwardly shrugged and moved on. Maybe someone on here might actually appreciate this story. Anyway, a couple of years ago I had just graduated high school and didn't really know what to do with my life yet, or what college I was going to go to. Since my sister is a lot older than me, by the time I graduated she had already gotten married, had a baby, and moved into a new house. They had just put in a brand new kitchen, and then they went to visit her husband's parents that lived in another state. Before they left, my sister asked me if I wanted to house sit and feed their cat 2 times a day. I said yes, because I was still living with my parents and wanted some time to myself, without my parents consistently nagging at me about what I want to do with my life. They were right, of course, but I just wanted some space. So I stayed at my sister's house, played with the cat, fed the cat regularly, watched movies, used their PlayStation, and so on. I often had to stand in the kitchen and wait for the cat to finish her food. She was a very picky eater, and I had to make sure that she actually ate when I fed her. So I was standing there every day, looking around randomly, being a little bit bored. I vividly remember that the kitchen was a really bright red color. My sister thought it looked great, and her husband just let her pick out the color without interfering because my sister is the one cooking anyway. I wasn't that interested in kitchens, but I definitely noticed the red color, and thought a couple of times that it was too bright and eye-catching. They might get sick of it easily and have to pay a huge amount of money to change it. I also took pictures and videos of the house to show them to my girlfriend. We joked about getting married and buying a house like this too, even though we both felt way too young for that and didn't even have jobs yet. I also filmed the kitchen and said to my girlfriend jokingly that I wouldn't let her choose a color like this because it's not my cup of tea, aka ugly, and she totally agreed with me. She wouldn't let me choose a color like this either. Several weeks after that, I got accepted into college and moved, so I didn't stay at my sister's house at all anymore. Approximately a year after that, I was back at my parents' house for holidays and my sister invited us all to dinner. I helped bring out the food and returned used dishes and loaded them into the dishwasher. While doing that, I noticed that they had a white kitchen now. I was confused, but didn't say anything because there was a lot going on. A couple hours later, I texted my sister because I remembered the new kitchen and thought it was funny that I was right all along. I texted her, "Why did you change your kitchen so soon? I thought you would get sick of the red, but I didn't think you would change the kitchen to a white one that fast." She was really confused because she had no idea what I was talking about. We texted back and forth and she explained that her kitchen had always been white, from day one when they installed it in the new house. There had never been a red kitchen, not even in the planning stages. I thought this was extremely weird, but I didn't want to give up. I suspected that she was pranking me. I looked up the pictures and videos on my phone. My heart sank when I saw it. The kitchen was white in every picture and video. I then went and asked my girlfriend if she remembered me sending her videos of my sister's house, and if yes, what color was the kitchen in. She said yes. She remembered watching the video and talking to me about the red kitchen. It couldn't have been a dream. I definitely stayed at my sister's house. My sister remembered me staying there and feeding the cat until they came back from their vacation. And my girlfriend clearly remembered watching the video with the red kitchen in it. But the color had changed in the video, so it can't be a prank by my sister or a false memory. My girlfriend and I couldn't have both hallucinated another color at the same time. We had a long-distance relationship and only talked on the phone or texted. We never did any drugs at all, and there was no alcohol involved either. And lastly, it wouldn't make sense for me to invent a story like this if it didn't actually happen. If I had to fabricate something, I would make it a lot more creepy and interesting than this, not like a boring kitchen color change. I still have no explanation besides it being a glitch in the Matrix. You could argue that it could have been the Mandela effect or a switch to a parallel reality too, but I believe that this is debatable. All these things might essentially stem from the same root. Maybe more random details change in my life, but I just don't notice them.